Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the meeting of February 28th of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Mr. Glavy, would you be so kind as to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. What I'd like to do for us tonight, before we get started on the real business at hand, which is to interview the final candidates for a consulting operation in regard to the common. Anyway, the set of questions in front of you have to be addressed consistently and clearly to each of the candidates. The only kind of questions we can respond to are very, very brief clarification. I will attempt to do that if the respondents do not understand the question clearly. But I'd like to have all of us stay on track of what's in front of us. Each of you has had a question assigned to you. That's your question to ask in the order shown. And at the close of the meeting, we will have a brief discussion after the candidates have completed their presentations and have departed the meeting area. We'll have a very brief discussion about our next steps. Are there any questions from here about procedure especially?
They're going to be presenting, I assume, maybe with some graphics or what?
I believe so.
So they're going to be using that screen. So it's, I don't know, seating-wise, I'm just looking at logistics here. Can you see that screen?
Yes, I can see the screen in the order in which that's why they stuck me in this corner. So I could always ask others what's going on here. Marion, would you be so kind as to be the timekeeper for the presentations to make sure? Okay. Are there any other questions? All right. The next step, just to remind everyone, since we're all here, our next step is after this process is over, we will begin checking the references of the candidates deemed most worthy of that kind of arduous activity. And that should take some time because it's telephone work and maybe something else that can't be done overnight. So with that in mind, are any of the candidates present yet? What?
So the first one is scheduled to come at 5:30.
Okay, all right.
So we can jump them out.
No, actually, it may be worthwhile to very, very briefly review what we're going to do or how soon after we begin this process of looking at the common with the assistance of the consultant, what our next steps are going to be. And I would like to get a sense from our committee what areas would you like to next turn our attention? I'll just start arbitrarily with you, Anna.
When you say what we want to turn our attention to, you mean other recommendations?
Yes. In other words, we have 67 of them. We already have several in flight. You may argue that some of them need even more attention of the original 7, or you could make the comment that we should start adding to our list. Or stand pat. I mean, I'm looking for...
My recommendation would be that we stand pat, to use your words. I actually think that we have a lot to be able to contribute toward ensuring that the consultants, whomever that may be, really gets off on a strong foot. So I think spending our time on that would probably be, in my opinion, the best course of action.
Jonathan?
Well, actually, I wasn't expecting that question, so I hadn't thought about it. And what Anna said certainly sounded very, very convincing to me. I mean, I'd like to have a little time to look at all those, both the 7 that we have on the list there, and we've focused on some of them and not on others, and then the other 60 that that we still have to look about. I mean, there's a lot of different ones, and you know, so many, and they're not particularly prioritized or anything on that list, so I think we should take a little time to look into that then further after we get the consultants on the way.
Paul, what's your perspective on this?
Mark was all ready to go. You jumped over here.
That's why I did it.
Well, I make a general comment in that I think, I think we're gonna have to, if we're gonna do our job right, get used to the notion of doing a number of things simultaneously, because it's just too much. If we did it linear, in a linear one after the other basis, we'd be here for 70 years. So, you know, obviously that doesn't mean we lose track of what's right in front of us right now and most important. There was a reason we picked the common first, and that does deserve the attention. But I don't think it's unreasonable to start seeing once that's underway, and, you know, there's certain periods of time where the consultant's gonna be doing their thing, and what do? Just sit and wait? That's a great opportunity to do things like, you know, Gary's proposal on the transportation. I think the next step there probably is getting in front of the selectmen and planning board, explaining its value, reminding people of why it came up in the master plan process, and see if we can get that underway. I would say also, and this comes from, you know, I don't remember where it ranks with other people's perspectives, but as far as, you know, my personal preference, I think a consideration of the Foster Street, Taylor Street corridor for an area of concentration, similar to the Common, is in order for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't have an overlay district yet, but it's a pretty good candidate for that. And two, the planning board is already entertaining a bunch of proposals up in that part of town that are pretty significant. So, you know, they're going to do their job, but rather than just wait and see how that turns out on an episodic basis, I think it's time, you know, I personally think it's time to start looking at that globally and thinking, you know, because that'll probably be an involved process, much as the Common process is.
Mark?
Well, Paul's still on my.
Good,
That's
thank
all
you.
right. No, I was just gonna say, I think what we've started with and how the headway that we've made so far has been phenomenal, considering that we've been stagnant for so long. We're gonna have consultants in front of us right now. I think we focus on that, on what we've got in front of us. And then, once the consultants have their marching orders and everything, then maybe we start looking at some other stuff.
So for you, it's a matter of timing, rather?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just want to urge, and all of us, and I don't mean to preempt you quite yet, or to start thinking about that step. And I personally also agree with the two elder statesmen here that Taylor Street is the next place for us
The
to
older
look.
statesman.
I'm wearing the tie. Anyway, yes, Gary, your view.
I agree with Anna. I think this is important to get this thing moving and make sure they're on the right path. We have not done a circle back to look at all the items of the implementation plan. We've been reaching out to the different committees and asking, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? But we have not gone back to the list and said, well, we heard that the Mpic is doing this, and we heard that the Historic Commission is doing this. So I think in accounting, to see kind of, okay, it's been about a year since the master plan was done. Which ones are ongoing? Which ones someone has the ball on, and which ones are probably the next wave? So I'd probably approach it that way.
Well, thanks a lot, because in combination, since I'm writing up our report for the year for the town meeting, the town report, I've gone back and taken a look at what we've done with basically just recounting activity, not necessarily making judgment of how far we've come, because most everything we have is still in flight. So I think I want to combine your suggestions, and
Yeah.
we'll return to the subject again.
But I think, we're an advocacy group for the most part, and an accountability group, I think is what we talked about. So most of the work that's being done on the master plan should be done by others. Should be done by other committees in other parts of the town, as to make sure they're all marching along the same lines of what we said we wanted to do in the master plan. I think, we have a few things on our plate because it didn't naturally fall on anybody else, like the transportation one and common. So I'm not thinking that we have to do so much in terms of, like, what did we do? It's more like an accounting of how are we all doing.
Well, point well taken. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments? If not, I think we have our first candidate.
Yeah, they'll be setting up for meeting.
I need my water in the car.
Hello. So you've got a big barrier here. Hi, I'm Larissa Brown from Stantec. How are you?
Paul Glade,
Hi.
how are you?
Nels.
Paul Glade.
Hello, hi,
Larissa
Anna.
Brown.
Hi, nice to meet you, Jonathan Leibowitz.
Hi, Anna Houston.
Hi, and I'm Nels.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Jonathan.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, nice to meet you. Jonathan Leibowitz.
Nice to meet you.
We know who you all are because your pictures, we've been looking at your pictures for a month or two now, so.
We have some more. How would you like this to plug in? Okay.
So the HDMI is here, if you want to test it out, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. We also have a USB if that doesn't work. I guess probably first.
So any trouble finding us?
Well, once you say police station, it sort of narrows it down.
Yes, it does, exactly. Well, we have the address and
Hopefully start at the beginning of the slideshow.
So is this being recorded so we have to talk into the mic? Is that the deal?
Yes.
Okay.
So you probably already know this. You've been thoroughly briefed, no doubt. You have an opportunity to make a presentation, and that's followed by questions from the implementation committee. And I'll be the quote moderator, not that you need moderation, but just in case something pops up.
Okay, great.
I will not protect you, okay?
Okay. All right.
All right.
And you all are the
This
master
is the
plan
master-
implementation committee?
Yes.
Okay.
We are tasked just for review to promote and guide the implementation of the master plan.
So shall we begin?
Floor is yours.
Well, we're very happy to be here and looking forward to the possibility of working with you all. And this is sort of an interesting project to make this sort of historic center, which has frayed a bit at the edges, into the kind of village that you all are looking for. Next. So we introduced ourselves. So this is who's here today. I'm the principal in charge, and I'll also be taking charge of the zoning aspect of the project. Nels is the project manager, really focusing on the planning and urban design. And then Alex Phillips here is our market guru and economic development person to bring sort of the realities of market to this. In addition, we have on our team, we have civil engineers who are very, have a lot of experience in sewer projects, which is one of the things you were concerned about. Frank Holmes, you can see there under utilities. And then we have a transportation group, which is, they're really planners, and so they're very, transportation planners, they're very focused on things like how to integrate different kinds of different modes, how to create walkability, all those kinds of things are they're big experts in. Next. So I want to say a little bit about who we are. We come from Stantec's Urban Places Group, and this is planning and urban design and associated kinds of expertise in a practice, a relatively small practice within a big global firm. So we see ourselves as having sort of the responsiveness of a small firm, yet we also have access to experts literally around the world in any kind of technical area that you might want. So we're able to be sort of a truly interdisciplinary kind of firm, but when we say that, we're here to work with you, that's who you're going to see. You're going to see we're the people you're going to see for your project. The other thing is that we have a lot of experience around the country as well as in Massachusetts. We do innovative plans, but they're always grounded in the realities of the particular place, the landscape, the culture and history of the place, and of course the realities of the market, because if you don't, it's nice to have a plan, but if you can't implement it, as you, the implementation committee, know, it's not really that meaningful. Next. So, just talking a little bit about what our principles are, we focus on people. Planning is really for people, and we want an inclusive and equitable kind of process and also product, creating distinctive and livable places, focusing also on prosperity, economically vital places which give opportunity for all people, plans that result in good performance, plans that are achievable and also sustainable both in an environmental sense and in a economic sense. And then we also think that plans are most successful when they really are based on, a strong community constituency and partnerships and collaborations, public and private, throughout the community. This is, probably can't read it, this was also in the proposal. This is my advertising sheet. So selected awards, we've done a lot of projects in various places, including Massachusetts, where we've won awards from the American Planning Association and various other groups. What's most important, though, is our plans typically get implemented, and that's the most important thing. Next. So talking about Littleton, we understand that you have the planning context here. You have a master plan. That master plan contains a vision for this area. And, it sounds like in the whole process, the Littleton Common vision, how to improve the town common area and the village, was really something that many people in the community talked about, and it was a big focus of the plan. So, we understand that you already have developed ideas about what you're looking for in that vision. And then on the other side, one of your big constraints is that you don't have sewer there, which is something, we were just driving around a little bit in the area, and you can see with the kind of strung out low density of commercial buildings and things like that. I mean, that's, that is a sign of each building has to have its own septic. Next. So, as we think about Littleton, and as I say, I've done projects in a lot of different places, some of them much bigger than Littleton, but I also have experience in this region. At one point in my career, I was the chief planner of the Northern Middlesex Council Government, so I'm familiar with this part of the state and the kinds of communities and the kinds of character that are here, so that we know that part of your values is that you sort of want to think of yourself still as sort of more of a small town and historic character community. Next. And so, part of what you're looking for, particularly in the common area, is this kind of village atmosphere that's walkable, that you have, maybe independent shops that serve the community, places, green spaces, and just generally speaking, you're not just looking for individual projects, you're really looking for creating a sense of place and a place that people will want to go to. Because the reality is that you also have competition, particularly if you're thinking about retail, just, whether it's the Point or some of the other areas that are relatively close. So what's going to make this place unique is very important. Next. And, part of it is it has to, you have to have an economy that really supports what happens there. And so part of it is looking at, the tax base, the market, and how you can maybe provide something that's different from what a Point supplies within the common area. Next. So, this is sort of our sense of what the different pieces of this plan would be. You're trying to create some scenarios that you can make judgments on and then, settle on a preferred plan. So we're talking about land use. Where are the opportunity sites? how will urban design make those opportunity sites appealing and help connect them? Obviously, look at all these options in terms of, is it realistic from a market and real estate point of view? How do you create an environment of safe walking, biking, and similar kinds of connections? Look at the sewer capacity options. What realistically is possible? What does it cost? What are the what's the cost benefit? Aligning your zoning to be consistent, and then obviously having some transportation ideas that you as a community can advocate with the state when you're looking at some of the state roads, because that's always part of the problem. You can't necessarily force them to do anything, but I have noticed that a lot of towns and cities in Massachusetts, if they just come back over and over and over again with the state and ask for what they want, they often eventually, get at least some part of it. But you have to be willing to be persistent and really understand why it is, have a good story to tell about why you want the changes that you want. So now I'm going to hand over to Nels, who will be the project manager, to talk a little bit more about how we would approach this.
Thanks, Larissa, and really nice to be here in front of the committee. So we took a quick look at the Littleton Common area and the Beaver Brook area as described in the RFP. We look forward to learning a lot more about it with you. But just right off the bat, some of the assets that we noticed were the historic properties on the common, including the mill and the general store. Of course, having that major IBM facility right there is a huge anchor, and is really speaking to the character of Littleton that is within a stone's throw of a horse farm just outside the study area as well. So there's definitely a rural character here. We also see the point there, which is still expanding, and we see some of the issues which are also described in the master plan around connectivity, especially for bikes and pedestrians. All right. So this is the approach that we propose to efficiently work through this process with you and with the community, starting with forming the work plan as the first scope item, having a kickoff where we would do a tour and interviews, then moving into the existing conditions analysis, which would be several streams running in parallel with each of our different expert groups. We would then present those findings at a town hall meeting to solicit feedback, have some kind of interactive mapping exercises to gauge the opinions of how the community expects to, what they expect of the future for the common area. We would then use that input in the scenario development and then present the findings from the 4 scenarios at an open house and then also online to solicit feedback, and then use the preferred scenario to develop the final plan, the zoning, and the recommendations, which we would then present to the public in a kind of unveiling and solicit written feedback then, and also online. And then we would move into the adoption phase and have their presentations to the boards. Next. So this is a brief outline of the schedule, how we see it moving forward. This schedule takes place over the course of the calendar year of 2018. So you can see that there's a few months in between each of the big public meetings. This is, again, to be confirmed with you. We could compress this quite a bit as well, depending on what you were looking for. Just being cognizant of the summertime and working in the summer in New England with community meetings can sometimes be hard. So now we're going to talk about each of the different components of our integrated approach. And I'll talk about a few of them, and then we'll have Alex and Larissa talk. So starting with public participation and how we approach that, because it's a key part of the project. Next. So as described in the work plan, we are going to have a series of meetings. And I want to emphasize here that all of our meetings and our public participation really always has a digital component and a face-to-face component. So high touch and high tech, we like to say sometimes. So starting with the interviews, we have in-person interviews, additional over the phone, the town hall will have the in-person interactive exercises, but then also a brief online survey for more input. And with the open house, and as specified in the RFP, we would love to have the scenarios presented in person, but then also have people be able to react to those online. And we would also collect comments in person and by email. Stantec Urban Places is first and foremost a planning and urban design practice that touches upon a lot of other things, including economic development, infrastructure, and transportation, which is why we're really excited about this project and the issues that it has. I just wanted to talk briefly about a project that we're doing currently with Jeff Speck, the author of Walkable City, for another community. This one happens to be in Elkhart, Indiana. And I bring this one up because it's also a kind of suburban retrofit. And you can see the buildings in red are the proposed developments, which we vetted for parking counts and the pro formas. And you'll notice that they're established in such a way along the streets and the public spaces so as to frame it and create a walkable place and a place that's welcoming for people while also being accessible. We also do scenario development in urban design. So if you look at these two parks, there's some difference on the bottom side in terms of how it might look. And this is an example of how we might do a scenario development, a very visual scenario development for this project. We work at different scales. So here's an example of how we might approach scenario development for a very large scale. This is for a comprehensive community master plan, but it's trying to get people to think about different options within their own frame of reference. So you're giving them a lot of information. On the infrastructure side, water, wastewater, and stormwater is very core to what we have at Stantec. Our office is, I want to say, half civil engineers sitting on the same floor as us, and so we're very comfortable tapping them, and they're extremely qualified. They've been working on different types of smart sewering and community sewering across the country, including some of these projects. And just one example, this is a master plan for the Athena Healthcare Facility in Watertown, Mass. And it has a very strong focus on green infrastructure, which we see as could be a possibility here in the common area as well. Moving on to transportation, we have a strong focus on active mobility, so that's walking and biking. I wanted to highlight two projects which were both collaborations between the team that you have here in front of you and our transportation planners in communities in Massachusetts. So this is an ongoing project in the city of Taunton. If you've ever been there, they have a Taunton Green, which is a very inaccessible open space because it kind of serves as a highway rotary. And this is a plan that would rationalize that traffic while also making the park more accessible and have traffic move more smoothly. We took a very similar approach when we worked in the community of Bridgewater on their downtown master plan. This is a linear rotary Central Park common. And again, we put the transportation on one side of it, and the other side we made into a shared street to enable walking and biking and cafes to spill out. And this is an example of a before and after that the transportation group worked on in Northampton. And this is a built project, which is a complete streets retrofit of an existing intersection. And here are some scenarios of the ilk that you might see in terms of thinking about different complete streets options. Alex?
So we're throwing a lot of information at you. Unfortunately, my section doesn't contain as many pretty pictures. I'm more on the numbers side. But it has data. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of bringing the market reality to the plans that we see. So like Larissa said, we can really gear towards implementation. So our approach towards the economic side is to take the review that the planners do of the existing zoning and the development that they propose, like I said, bring that market reality to it. So the data that we bring in includes demographics, who lives here, who wants to live here, how much money do they make, how much are they able and willing to spend on their housing, on their shopping, things like that. We also look at the real estate in the area. what are rental rates, what are comparable sales prices, what's available, what's the inventory, as well as other data like vacancy and absorption. We have access to CoStar data, which the charts that you see on the left of the slide are pulled from CoStar. It's a search I did this morning actually on Littleton. Littleton office. It doesn't tell you much. I didn't refine the search very much, but it just shows you that we have access to this data, and it can be very informative as we start to build our model. This is an example that you can't read of a scenario analysis that we did, and the point of this is to show you this is for one building, 3 different scenarios. We actually did, I think, 8 on that particular project. Different programs in the same building and what that meant. And this was, we put our developer hat on and said, you know, what are the capital implications and then what are the operating implications? This and the following 2 slides are a different type of scenario analysis where we had the same program and we were looking for sites and how that different scenario, that different program might lay out on multiple sites. So this was, we worked with other groups, other folks in the planning group to lay this program out and then put financial metrics to these models to understand what, in this case, the county government might receive for their contribution to the project. We also work on fiscal impact analyses. Here we're really estimating, we're trying to get to the benefit, annual benefit of construction projects. So that takes into account the cost, school child generation, as well as safety costs, fire and police, and we also estimate tax revenue generation.
I'll just talk briefly about zoning here. Could you show the next one? I think that for this particular area, what you want to do is get some kind of what we call a hybrid zoning approach. And obviously reviewing all your existing zoning and development design standards, that type of thing. But so we want to see where does conventional zoning continue to be appropriate, where it's desired. I mean, conventional zoning, everybody knows how it works, so that, you know, if you don't have to remove it, if it's working okay where it is, let's leave it there. But then what I think you need is to look at form-based zoning, particularly for the areas that you want to be more walkable, where you're looking for creating a strong sense of place. And the way I envision this is that there will be sort of a basic framework, and one of the things that we'll need to talk about and agree on is, you know, are you looking for, would you feel comfortable with, you know, by right zoning with lots of design standards and that type of thing, but still by right, or are you looking for some kind of special permit process, you know, some kind of overlay? I mean, there are different kinds of options, and it, you know, it'll depend on in some degree on the comfort that the community has with the types of projects that we might be promoting here. And I think that, I don't know, I think I put it in the proposal. I was at one point on the Cambridge Planning Board and the chair, so I had seen everything. And I think there are a number of different ways you could look at this to get the result that you're looking to have. But one of the things you want to do is have, as much as possible, have this zoning be very clear, understandable. If we need some pictures to help people understand particularly the kinds of design standards. And when we're talking about design standards and guidelines, we're not talking about dictating architectural styles, but we're talking about function, we're talking about creating an environment which is comfortable for people to be in. That's really what this is all about. So, you know, obviously, as part of doing this, I'd be collaborating with your town council, and then, you know, once there's an agreement on what these zoning amendments should be, we'll write the amendments, put them on the map, and then, you know, help you take them to the boards that you need to take them to. So I think this is, that's all we have to say for the moment, but we know that you will have questions, so we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Well, we're ready to start with the questions.
I gave you the first question, I guess.
Yep.
The Littleton Common area has multiple challenges. This includes an area bisected by 2 state highways and contains private and commercial property whose owners may have competing interests with each other and the aim of the town residents for the common. What would be your approach to bringing these parties together to identify the mutual benefits that can arise from revitalizing the common area?
Well, I'll say a few words first. I mean, we have a lot of experience working with, multiple conflicting desires, at least that various interests have in any kind of project. And the key is to find a way that everybody gets something that they're interested in, they could be happy with. And also, in this case, I think really part of what we'll be working with people to do is to show how making a change can actually increase their value for them. Whether it helps them get more customers, whether it increases the value of their property. Working with MassDOT is a little bit more complicated, though they now are committed to complete streets, and they have a more sort of progressive approach than they used to. Though clearly there's the desire for throughput for commuter traffic and that type of thing. So, what we need to do is that's why the scenarios are also helpful, because it gives you opportunities to tweak things to try to get to a result that is, acceptable by all, maybe enthusiastically accepted by some. And I think that part of it is also for the zoning part of it, people have to have a clear idea if there's going to be redevelopment, what exactly they're looking at. What people don't like and what property owners don't like and what developers don't like is they don't like to feel that they have to be mind readers. They want to know what's desired, and then they're usually, it's okay, then they'll do it. And the town can maybe help also in some kinds of situations where, if you're proposing redevelopment and that means that a small business might have to be relocated, help them do that, because it helps you to have them in town, and then that they'll be more likely to accept that. Do you have any thoughts?
You spoke, I just want to follow up just
Sure.
real quickly. You spoke earlier on in your presentation about interacting with the state.
Yeah.
We are very dependent upon, we have 2 highways intersecting right in the middle
Right.
of this.
Right.
We're going to have state input. How do you see including the state in the process that you
Well, our
propose?
transportation group works with the state all the time.
Do you think you have good ends?
We have good relationships with all the state transportation agencies. So, were you going to say anything?
Yeah, I was.
You need to talk in the microphone.
I work regularly with the real estate arm of MassDOT, and it's a big push of theirs as part of the governor's Open for Business initiative to put their land back to productive use, and I think they'd be in support of that same sort of thing here.
Thank you.
I have the next question. Unlike the case for commons in some towns in Massachusetts and elsewhere, Littleton Common lacks nearby iconic historic sites, scenic waterways, or well-known institutions that can serve as a natural attraction to the residents and visitors alike. What has been your approach to revitalizing town centers that lack such obvious advantages, and what are some of the keys to success and pitfalls to avoid based on your experiences?
Well, I'll say a few things. I mean, you want to have some kind of attraction for people, and I think in a situation like Littleton's, and you can find this happening in other places too, if you don't have a natural attractor, though, you could be able to make, for example, the mill complex perhaps into, some kind of art center. There are things like that, or little antiques, or those kinds of things. But one of the most important things is to have programming. So what that means, one of the things to think about, and which we might talk about during the process, is, once this is underway, would it be worth it for the town to get a like a manager, just like a Main Street manager, or have somebody in town government who helps work with other organizations, have concerts, have farmers markets, have things happening that will bring people to the common area, to the Littleton Village Common, beyond what is just the permanent business around the common. And I think that really is the key. And, sort of there are all kinds of possibilities. You could have something to do, you could have demonstrations of some kind of activity. You could have, sports groups coming there to recruit people. I mean, it's just your imagination and what kinds of local government, local organizations you have that could attract people. Maybe they're doing some of these activities somewhere else. Get them to come down to the common to do them. Or it could be regional groups too. There might be sort of regional music groups that would be happy to come here. You could have a series of concerts on the common. So programming is the key. And I don't know if there are some other things you could think about, even from a design point of view.
Yeah, and I also want to say that I think a lot of the types of uses that were specified in the RFP would be great starts. So the small shops, the housing would definitely bring life back to the common. One of the things that we're most excited about is having the 3,000 employees right next door at IBM. And I can only imagine that right now, some of them might eat at the Italian restaurant there.
Yeah, or Il Forno across the street.
Yeah, or go to the Point. But that's a huge potential lunchtime crowd that would help support shops, and it would be a great anchor institution.
And support programming too.
And programming, yeah.
So, just a quick follow-up on that. So the fact that it's split, the common is split between 119 and also the relative small size of it, you don't think that would be a restriction? Some of the programs you're talking about, Larissa?
Well, I think that's one of the things we have to look at. I mean, when we were just talking about it today. One thing is you just look at the map, you think, well, maybe you should close that central street, which I know commuters would go insane. But the point we're trying to make is we have to sort of think a little bit out of the box.
Right.
There could be ways to make this work and figure out how you would make it work.
Thank you.
A couple of members of the Historical Commission and others have some idea about that, which it's just started, so we don't want to even say anything about it, but that's a possibility. Okay, my question is, what is the best example from your experience for successfully developing a localized redevelopment plan? Was it successful, and why do you feel it is comparable to the challenges with the Littleton Common?
Well, we've done, sort of redevelopment approaches to, a number of different places and at different scales. And just off the top of my head, I'm having a little difficulty coming up with just one which could, which could answer that question. I mean, I think that the work that we're doing in Taunton now, even though it's a bigger community and a bigger city, is relevant in the sense that they have this tremendous asset, in the Taunton Green, which kind of gets used once a year when they have a big Christmas thing on the green. But otherwise, it's been, as part of sort of the decline for a long time of downtown, downtown and the green, this all became a place just to go through, not a place where you'd want to be and to do anything. And so the work we're doing there, I think, is really beginning to, change people's perceptions of what's possible. Because again, the truck routes, there are all kinds of, transportation issues that are related to it, but as part of a general revitalization of the whole area, this is becoming something that the city's really taking up and taking forward and getting, grants to work on. And so that's, I think that's something that is, in some ways similar. And, on the programming side, I worked at one point for as a consultant with the City of Boston when they were developing all their urban Main Streets programs, and there again we had the opportunity to work with the community, the merchants, and various people within these commercial areas to make them more effective, to make them attract people. And part of that was physical changes, and part of it was organizational and programming changes. So, so we've done both the physical and the organizational side. I don't know whether Nels, you have anything that offhand
Yeah.
would be.
We have a project which is moving into implementation in downtown Brockton, which won an award recently. It was before my time, but Larissa and others worked on Kendall Square, which has become a success. A little bit different than here, but we have been.
Well, we have a big high-tech
Yeah,
center.
there you go. There's
Depending on the community's appetite for development, maybe it's not that far off.
right.
So, also a lot of our work has been throughout the country. So we've been working a lot in Ohio and some of the other communities further afield.
Mr. Levy. Next, okay. The Littleton Master Plan process included several types of public input, from stakeholder interviews to large public forums to personal interactions at town events to a website. Some were more successful than others. While the MPIC, us, will be happy to help craft the form of the public input process, what alternative outreach methods would you like to use in Littleton to reach those who are very busy or hard to reach?
Well, busy, I mean, what we find more and more is that there are a lot of people who prefer to participate online because they are very busy. They, they're interested, but they just as soon, do it at midnight rather than, have to come to a meeting or something like that. I mean, we feel that the face-to-face meetings can still be very important, and one of the ways in which they're important is that it means that people are talking to each other. They're not just talking to us, the planners, or to you, the committee. So that's still, a very important aspect. But we can also, we can also make the online, the online engagement work to have people responding to people. We do have, for example, we have access to a platform which is called Civic Comment, in which you can put documents. It can be pictures, it can be, it can be reports, whatever, in PDF form. You put them on this platform, and people can just go into them, and they can click anywhere, and they can leave a comment. And there also can be conversations around those comments. So that's one way, to give people sort of a more direct online experience. We would work with you to try to figure out, are there specific ways just to make people in the town more aware of this? I mean, sending information out to schools and PTOs to, I don't know whether you have well, it sounds you probably do have like a local TV. I mean, there are a whole series of things that one can do to try to get people involved and, give them alternatives. I think this is one of the sort of keys to getting people to involved. That you first of all, you have to repeat yourself 50 times, to make sure that people hear about it. It has to be redundant, and there have to be alternatives. People participate in very different ways. Some people just want to keep an eye on things to find out if anything really bad is happening, so they have to show up. Other people love to come and discuss and think about the future. So there are different kinds of ways in which people will want to be involved, and we want to try to work with you. Every town is a little different, every community, in terms of, what are the best ways to find people. So we'll do our best with you to offer a variety. We have also this kind of smartphone survey app that we use, which is very popular actually when we use it within the meetings, because we ask people questions, they can use their smartphones, and then they immediately see what the answer is, and so that's always something that people enjoy as well. So we're always looking for, these little new ways of trying to get people involved and get them interested.
Nice question. Keeping in mind that data at the granular level for robust economic modeling for the Littleton Common may be lacking, what analysis tools and what proven economic modeling methods do you plan to consider to use to evaluate risk-reward of the four scenarios for the Common?
So I think I started to get to that a little bit by saying, we have this CoStar data. You're right, it's actually used to work at CoStar, so I know that the data is only as good as the users are willing to supply. And that's why we really like to talk to local brokers and get a sense of the market that way. So we do a lot of conceptual pro formas and try and, like I said, put the developer hat on and understand what the cost of a project might be. And we do a lot of these, so we have a pretty good sense of what the construction costs are and that side of it. And then ultimately understand what the program is based on the work that the community is putting in and the planners are providing to us, so we can get the best sense of the outcome of the project.
This is just a side question, not a question, but an extension of the remark, and that is communicating the model and its significance to the public. It touches on the previous comment. I saw the slide. I was just a little bit more on that topic, just a smidge more on how do you get this concept across that's so data-driven?
That's a great question. Usually my side isn't quite as involved with the community engagement. I leave that to the pros, but
we use infographics. We try to provide sort of user-friendly visuals to help people understand the base. They don't have to understand every detail, but what are the key aspects of it? Yeah.
right.
Thank you. Anna?
Yes. So the revitalization of a town common can take several years and involve a significant investment of human and material resources. Based on your experiences, what are some of the tools and processes that you have provided to your clients so that they can successfully execute the course of action that has been adopted by the town, given limited resources?
Yes, always that final phrase. Well, what we do in all the projects that we create, we always have an implementation section where we look at, what are the tasks, who should do them, if you need additional funding, approximately what that might be and where you might get it, if there are grants or something that can help you do it. I think that, realistically, there's also sort of a time frame, what comes first, what comes second, how do you create the platform so that you can, the foundation so you can keep going forward. And, that's the kind of thing that we try to do to help people understand the step-by-step, where, what are the steps you need to take to accomplish the various tasks to get to the outcomes that you want. And also understand that sometimes there may be new opportunities that are unforeseen that come up, so can be ready for those, but also you could have, obstacles that you didn't expect. And I think one of the things that's important is to have also a schedule where you go back and look at, you evaluate what, here's the plan, what have we been able to accomplish, where have we been successful, where have there been problems, and not in a who's responsible, who's the bad one who didn't do something, not that way, but figure out what it is we need to do, and do we need to change our approach because some condition has changed. So you always have to be adaptable, but we put together for you an implementation roadmap or pathway, which can be suggesting what kinds of, an organization to put together, who should be represented on, in that group, how you can distribute tasks and all that kind of thing, especially in a community where, like Littleton, where so much is done by volunteers, which is just a reality that we all have to to realize. But one of the things that's going to be important here is to make sure that you have some allies working with you who are not just residents, the property owners, maybe some business owners, to make sure that there's a proper mix and representation, because that's your constituency. You have to keep that constituency going and keep them involved.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So what are the next steps in terms of your decision-making and?
Well, we'll be back in touch. Is the only thing I can really say. I don't, it's not that long, and it's not months. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so.
And the other thing I want to do in that connection, would you be the point of contact for the next steps?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Okay. Well.
So we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. We hope positively. Thank you very much.
We thank you for your very productive, comments and all. I mean, it was very instructive for us. I think, hearing this, I hope the same thing will be true with the other people, and we'll decide what to do. But thank you very much for everything you've
Thanks for having us.
been able to tell us.
Thank you. Stay in Littleton, go to dinner,
Yeah.
Watch a movie.
Yeah, we can do all these things now.
That's right.
I know Littleton has actually a lot going for it for a relatively small place. And I also looked up that you have your, you have above 10% affordable housing. Good for you guys, so you're sort of taking care of your Chapter 40B responsibilities. So looks like you're keeping your eye on the ball.
Thank you.
And hopefully looking forward to out of state.
That's right, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Didn't take as long as we thought, so.
6:14.
I'm sorry?
It's 6:14.
Clock over there.
Next one, do it. What time is it next?
6:30.
Okay. Do you want to take a brief?
Take a few minutes, yeah.
A brief break?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll stay really on TV. Just can't shut it off.
So you want to go meetings?
On Friday.
Good for you.
Well, it'll be interesting to compare. Clearly, experience in doing this.
Well, hi. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Let's see, it'll be taped, so if you wouldn't mind using that microphone, the TV will pick that up.
Okay.
Does it work inside the room?
Okay.
That seems to work.
Yeah, that looks fine.
Can everybody see? Is that?
Yeah. As good as we'll ever see.
I do. Yeah.
So we'll go up there when it's our turn to.
Yeah.
Do you want to handle questions throughout the presentation? Come up to the dais if it's sort of a question relevant to us, or?
Yeah, I can give you the format, so you
Okay.
know, because it's sort of standardized. You have an opportunity to make your presentation. Unless it's something really obscure, you won't be interrupted. And that's followed by questions from our group here, all who are members of the implementation committee.
Great.
We can't point to the screen. The screen doesn't see it, but.
Okay, for this one.
Yeah. I will. That's good. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for having us here tonight. We really appreciate it. I'm Julie Conroy. I'm with Fort Point Associates. Our firm is an environmental consulting firm out of Boston, and I have a wonderful team with us tonight. And I'll start off by introducing our UTIL folks. So Tim Love is principal from UTIL. Jessica Robinson is a planner, associate planner, and a transportation planner. Kenan Lagasse is, I think, a senior designer, right? And then Rod, help me pronounce your last name. Mortamedy. From UMass Boston Donahue Institute. And we'll talk a little bit about our agency so you can have an understanding of where we're coming from. We wanted to give you some visualization of how we saw the project. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity. I personally am very familiar with this project as I used to work for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And I also worked with the Charles River Watershed on the smart sewering concept, so I do fully understand what you're facing here, as well as the other team members that we have worked in these concepts in various ways. We also wanted to show our faces on the screen in case. Some of us couldn't make it tonight. My great colleague, Emma Trawler, couldn't make it. She's our environmental planner and would be working with me on this project, as well as Jamie Fay, who is our president of our organization. So we really, I think, bring a great sort of mix of skills to our team. And I think we are a group of folks who are set apart because we're all small Metro Boston-based firms. We're based in Boston. We do all our work within this area. We're very, very familiar with how to work with Massachusetts municipalities. We've done a number of different projects ranging from economic development and assessment to climate assessment work to design and implementation of regulatory changes and zoning changes all throughout our team. And we understand the challenges with the sort of interesting and individualized type of government setup that Massachusetts municipalities have, and of course Littleton as well, and how the regulations can become passed and implemented. And we have proven that we have our design, the team of our designers have overcome numerous challenges in terms of how do you address, land use interests from various interests. We are a tight-knit group of folks. We've worked together on different projects, and we've come to know each other very well over the past several weeks in looking at this project. And we're leaders in the fields of economic analysis, landscape design, and urban design, and climate planning and policy making as well. So we hope that we could bring a wealth of skills for you. Our collective experience is from a number of different perspectives, which I think that is something that we could offer. So for example, our firm, Fort Point Associates, we've done a number of different projects in Boston, developed big, high-profile development projects in Boston that include permitting and planning and regulatory change. And we've done this work for 30 years. We've worked in a number of different municipalities in addition to Boston, and also have found that folks have come to us for project management of large projects. And we spent numerous years, all of our team members, and looking at different regulations and establishing changes. And UTL is a very unique and dynamic urban design organization. I'll let them speak to that, but we always look to work with them because they really bring a fresh perspective to placemaking and thinking about how to provide design services that can really illustrate what is possible within an area. And UMass Donahue Institute, we find them to be top of the field in economic analysis and looking at economic development. They've worked across Massachusetts and nationwide to look into various issues. Our understanding of the project, we really took a deep dive into what the past public engagement process was, and also where you were coming from to this point in looking at very specific ideas for how you want to develop this particular district under the wastewater and sewer concept, the smart sewering concept. And we understand that there is very specific, critical work to be accomplished within a very set time frame. So we fully intend to, utilize the skills of our team independently and as we come together to efficiently get through the work of the project. And we know that this is building off of a master planning process and your former public engagement process, and we understand that we want to reinvigorate that and get folks within the community to take a look at what their interests are in potential conflicts surrounding different various land uses that are of interest. And again, I mentioned that we fully understand the smart sewering concept, the district concept. I'm an environmental planner by trade. I understand, how it's important to take a look at what the constraints, but also what the opportunities are in terms of build-out analysis, but also your just sheer environmental resources of the area. So just jumping into our approach, and then what I'll do is I'll let our team members talk about their ideas for approaching the project. Just sort of holistically, we think that looking to the past to understand your future is critical. And I wanted to put this quote by George Washington. We should not look back unless it's to derive useful lessons from past errors and for the purpose of profiting by dearly brought experience. I think that was kind of a point as to what we're thinking about when, you look at Littleton and it's got such a rich history. It's amazing. I went and looked into the Lyceum Museum, and all of the really dynamic but mixed types of characteristics of the community. I worked as a sub-regional coordinator when I was at the MAPC for this region, and got to know Keith Bergman very well, and I fully understand that there's a very dynamic history to Littleton, and it's really interesting, and I think that that's going to be a really good approach to start from, a foundation to start from. And also, just our methodology is stakeholder driven, but it's also data driven. You know, our team here has done a lot of work with various different programs, from SketchUp to, you know, the design programs that they use. I have some skills in CAD and GIS, and visualizing, providing a visualization to what we're looking at, I think is going to be very important. And also that taking the information and generating a blueprint for you all to make informed decisions, well-informed decisions, in particular with regard to zoning changes, is going to be critical. So that's sort of the holistic view. In the scope of work, of course, we looked very carefully at exactly the types of tasks that you were looking for within the RFP. And so we understand that there are these two primary tasks, looking at preparing sort of a Littleton Common planned area in terms of a detailed plan for the common itself and how that relates to the rest of the community. And also, we think that the adoption of the zoning amendments and any regulatory changes that need to occur is also critical. And that's near and dear to my heart. A lot of the work that I've done over the past 15, 20 years in different municipalities has always been, you know, what are our barriers currently to making the types of design changes and plan implementation that we want. So we look very carefully at that. And the box here is just sort of giving you a flavor as to which members of the team will really address a lot of the tasks. Our organization, Fort Point, will be managing sort of overall management of the team and the public engagement process. We've been involved in numerous different stakeholder engagement processes, very much like this for the revitalization. Planning and design will really be util, taking a look at, you know, illustrating these particular design features. Economic analysis, of course, UMass Donahue Institute, that's their, you know, bread and butter, to frame these fixed physics of the common in relationship to economics and your expectations. And then also zoning and regulatory change, that's where Fort Point will jump back in, our expertise and working very directly with the state, a number of different agency and state change, but also, you know, for example, we're working on the state building code, the next iteration of that. We're very much in the knowledge and understand how to get those regulatory changes done. This is just a very rough sketch of the proposed schedule. We looked at what you had in the RFP and tried to really frame out, okay, this sort of sequential events would make sense. We are proposing various types of committee, committee yourselves, and also if this committee needs to be expanded to include other departments, we think that that's the composition of those folks, and also trying to think of when would be the best points in the project and milestones to engage with the public, so to ensure that they're really up to speed on every part of the process. I've learned from a lot of the climate planning work that I've done, you really need to make sure that there's these key points that you're engaging the community or municipal leaders. So we've just outlined that as a proposal. Of course, subject all to change depending on the needs of the community. In public engagement, again, this is something that we really find critical. I mean, whenever we're engaged in a planning process, and my colleagues will probably agree, really your end goal is to make sure that whatever you're planning for is actually truly implemented and that your stakeholders are your community members. I mean, you have lives and very important jobs and things to do. You don't want the, not burden, but the work to solely be a municipal sort of implementation process. It's always a better process when you have the community feel like this is their plan, this is their blueprint. So essentially these bullet points are really trying to find ways to ensure that that happens, to keep community members engaged and to find these really innovative ways to get folks to take a look at what we're proposing and designing. And our work in zoning regulations, again, honestly, I thought that you really well laid out how you wanted to go through that process. It very much aligns with the way that we typically work on regulatory change in zoning in terms of these points where you're looking at, what are the current barriers within the gamut of regulations that you have, from site planning to even stormwater management. There's various different barriers that I think aren't necessarily thought of until you take a real deep look. And then collecting that information and designing the zoning changes that you want, and also making some recommendations for a regulatory change. That's exactly how we would do it. And again, we're very familiar with the zoning districts that you have now and how this would play out. So with all that sort of setting us up, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, and they're going to talk about their specific role.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Love from founding principal of UTIL. This is an exciting project for us, I think, because of the inherent physical qualities of the common, and the opportunity really to change its qualities while looking very specifically at where infill development might happen. So I'm going to talk about ways we've thought about it so far. First is that we do a lot of our planning work by starting by thinking about the real estate market and the way that the market might dovetail with urban design and placemaking goals. And that's typically done by doing what we call development test fits, which are drawings like this one. You see the one on the top with the red floors. That's a study we did for the mayor of Northampton for a site on the north side of Pulaski Park in Northampton to test a couple of development concepts relative to the market through mass development funding, to also create an active edge to the park that might include a restaurant or a cafe. So that included some financial pro formas to understand which of those proposals the market would want to build. But we also do visualizations like the one on the bottom for a site in New Bedford, Massachusetts, that is partly existing buildings and partly an infill building that also was going to make a better edge to an existing park in the downtown of New Bedford. So our role, our skills is that we understand the metrics of all scales and all kinds of development, from retail to housing to all scales of office commercial. Because we do that work too as architects, but we think about it through our planning. We always think about placemaking first, the goals of placemaking, to inform then what development concepts might support that. We're very realistic
You
about...
define that term, it's one that I've seen come up, but I'm
Which one?
not an expert in this field. So placemaking?
Well, placemaking is a larger goal between a zoning code that might encourage a certain kind of building, improvements to the streetscape improvements, and even guidelines about shop fronts, to think about them holistically to create a kind of total environment that's better than the sum of the parts. The sum of the parts is better than each thing thought about individually. And the challenge with that is that through a normal town planning process, those are in very different camps. Public Works deals with, and I'm going to tell you the Weston story in a minute, which is a placemaking project. The zoning code frames what developers build. Public Works thinks about streetscape improvements, and there might be an ordinance about shops. There might be choices about street lamps that are spec'd, but too often those things are in separate buckets. And so we're hoping with the Littleton Common project to help you think about those things as a kind of single suite of issues to think about. So again, I have an example in a minute. I think that will even put kind of images to the concept. We also, when we do these development concepts, we have to be realistic about parking. What a lot of planners tend to do is show village concepts and wish away the automobile for a minute to make people like the kind of stage set view. And then when the development community comes or the zoning ordinance is discussed at the town what about the parking, how many spaces per unit, and that vision of a pre-war, future suddenly gets compromised by some of those issues too. So we have to look at parking right away. Parking is the tail that wags the dog. And we also, in terms of any town-owned land, I don't know if there is any, we also often roll our planning work over to actual RFPs, development RFPs. So we have a lot of experience doing that as well. So I want to show you two of a lot of examples I could show you. First, I want to show you a very recent project we're working for the city of Everett, the kinds of drawings we would do for a committee like this to explain development options. This is a larger development. This is a larger scale development than I think is appropriate for Littleton Common, but the kind of graphics we would do for you we thought would be helpful. This is the existing City Hall in Everett. They have an idea to move their City Hall to the former high school to redevelop. This is right in Everett Square. Developers are very interested in this area suddenly. So these are the kinds of alternatives that we would do when we do these, which is that we, in this case, we're showing ground floor retail in red. And we're showing two options with apartments or condominiums on the upper floors, and those are showed in yellow. Each of the lines are floors. And when we generate these, we generate the metrics, the program that matches the picture that we show. So on the left is a lower density proposal. It's a 4-story building with 3 stories of residential units above retail. We can get 12,000 square feet of retail in that footprint, not counting the lobbies and things, and then a much denser development. To then have a discussion with a committee just like yours and the city of Everett in that case about the pros and cons, because the bigger the development, the more the parking demand and the more complication there is. We do these not only as a 3-dimensional image to show the relative scale and height of buildings in the area, but we also show a diagram of the ground floor plan, how much is retail, where the parking is, and then we do typical floors. We show the apartments, we show where the lobby is, so that it's really a kind of a concept design to justify then some of the metrics. And in this case, this is going to end up being an RFP that at some point the city of Everett will issue for public land using our diagrams as part of the prospectus for the RFP. And this is the other option, just showing you that this is a smaller proposal with a typical floor above. So the other thing that we do a lot of on an ongoing basis, not just for the final deliverables, is we really like doing eye-level before and after perspectives. This is a site in downtown New Bedford. Mass Development controls the site now. It's a vacant lot. One of the options a couple of years ago was to convince UMass Dartmouth to build a graduate student dorm here, right across from the graduate art program in the former Star School. We showed, the community at large that you could design a building that would fit right into the kind of, pre-war commercial architecture of New Bedford. We use this to show that you can be very contextual and appropriate with infill development. It doesn't have to look like something from outer space. I think the most relevant project that we're in the second phase of now is Weston Town Center, which is in many ways very similar to the scope of your project in terms of our role. I don't know, have you been to Weston Town Center before? Yeah, okay. It's a collection of, this is Boston Post Road, I can't point, that runs along. It's very similar to your considerations about the corridor as a historic corridor too, so that also aligns quite closely to your master plan and your larger vision for this. Very importantly, the town common, which is the large green space to the right, was designed by Arthur Shercliffe, who came out of the Olmsted office, probably the most important town planner in America in the 1920s and 1930s. He went on to, I don't have time for this, but it's a good story. The Rockefellers hired him away from his practice to really be the landscape architect and architect for Colonial Williamsburg. So he got a good deal from the Rockefellers. He left Massachusetts. He also designed the Paul Revere Mall in the North End. So that was a clue for us that, that the way we were going to recover a more rural character in Weston was to think about the town common and better link the commercial area which is the area where the parking lots are, to the town common as a continuous concept of placemaking. This is maybe a way to answer your question. So we use these drawings to talk about our double agenda. There was a big transportation piece here too. We looked at the parking, both public and private, in the entire town center, and proposed both on public and private property a better arrangement of things. But what's key to this project is what we call the lane diet, which is there's too much asphalt in Weston for the traffic and even the traffic at rush hour. So the drawings first show before and after of the amount of asphalt. So and you'll see very importantly that the town hall, the town common is beyond. By getting rid of the asphalt, we created 2 new open spaces that link a series of open spaces right to where all the shops are. So this is the rendering of that. Town halls beyond, the town green. We've got both a new park right across a street, and then another crosswalk, and you're at what we call the town square, which is brand new. This is a view looking the other way, kind of hovering in a balloon over town hall. There's the fire department. You can see again, Brothers Marketplace is the nice grocery store in town, the before and after with the asphalt, and then the visualization. As part of this, we also convinced the town, and this is the whole town, we had a full town meeting to underground the utilities. So this was very effective before and after of the impact of undergrounding the utilities. I'm warning you, it's expensive. At the first town meeting, they approved everything in their master plan but the undergrounding, and then everybody was so mad it didn't pass. They had a second town meeting and they passed it. And so this is how we teed it up for a town meeting vote. They were just going to resurface these streets, and our role was to convince the town to spend more design fees to do the master plan, and then commit even more fees, mostly for the utilities, to do the first phase of study for undergrounding the utilities. And now it's full speed ahead, and we're advising Mpic Engineering, who's executing the project. So it seemed very relevant to us, this project. We had a blast doing it, which is why we're here. Okay, that's my piece.
That's mine.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. I took too long.
That's
Okay.
I can go fast. I did grow up in the Midwest, and I've been to my share of auctions, so if we have to go really fast, we can. So I'm Rod Motamedy. I'm a research manager at the UMass Donahue Institute. We're going to be doing the economic impact component of the project. So I would like to start talking to you about our experience, if you're not familiar with us. We are essentially the economic development / consulting arm of the University of Massachusetts, where essentially it's kind of it took me 6 months to fully understand it after I started working there, but we're essentially a nonprofit consulting company that happens to be under the umbrella of the university. As a result of all of that, we have a unique position in the state economy. We have access to all of the knowledge of the university while also being an independent unit that takes on a lot of independent work. We are, for example, the state, we produce the state's official population estimates and population forecasts for all the cities and towns in the state. We are the state data center, so we're the official liaison with the census and all census data. We produce the Mass Benchmarks Journal, which is the official journal of the state's economy, along with the Boston Fed. And we do ongoing consulting work of the kind that we're talking about here today, including economic analysis work. I have spent probably 10 years of my career doing almost nothing but economic analysis work, and I'm not the only one in our team with that level of experience. We try to approach projects by casting as wide a net as is fair and justifiable. We want to make sure every dollar and job that is rightly attributable to a project is counted, but we do all of that within a context of very strong methodological rigor. We don't want any of our projects to be criticized for unfairly attributing things or trying to, goose the numbers to get things that are unreasonable. We come into this work with a reputation that we think is rightly earned, and it elevates the stature of all of the work that we do. It comes attached to that reputation. So the economic modeling approach, we can spend time talking about in question and answer, but I did want to give you just a brief overview of how we are thinking about approaching this project. Obviously, there are two parts. First is the analysis of the redevelopment scenarios. We will take those from UTILA and the other team and the rest of the team, and we will essentially populate the alternative scenarios they come up with jobs. We have numbers on average number of employees per square foot by industry and land use type. So once we have an idea of what the space will be, we can fill it with people. And if we know the industry, we know the occupational mix, we know the income mix, we can even talk about educational and skill requirements for those jobs, so we can talk a little bit about job quality and so on. We can also use those improvements to talk a little bit about the net impacts on property taxes for the region. And then this information, the jobs, the incomes, the property taxes, construction, if we have that kind of information, then feeds into the economic impact analysis. That's the direct effects that you hear people talk about quite a bit. That feeds into the economic analysis. The choice of the model, I think, will remain unresolved until we get a bit deeper into this. We can get into that in some of the next slides, but we have experience with all of the major models, REMI, Implant, RIMS, which is the BEA's model. The economic models take what you have in front of you, this diagram, and essentially multiply it for every business in the economy, every element of the supply chain, every consumer relationship, and so on. So what the economic models do, and then what we're going to do, is essentially measure the magnitude of all those arrows. All of those arrows have a dollar attached to them, and what we're going to set out to do is try to measure the amount of dollars attached to each one of those arrows. And then this economic analysis then needs to be contextualized within the key visions for the point, for the master plan. Some of that comes from the planning, retaining the small town feel, retaining redevelopment scenarios that are consistent with the history of Littleton, and so on. And we will try to couch those, again, in that same context: retail trends, housing trends. We're going to pull in some of our own population estimates, population trends, what's the regional market look like, and so forth. That also feeds into some of the data that we intend to use, but again, we can get to that in some of the question and answer. I'm sure you're getting tired of listening to us. So one of the things that I felt important to point out in our proposal, and I think it's important to point out now, is that this economic analysis does not come without its challenges. Any city or town is effectively too small for most economic models, let alone a small town like Littleton. But even Boston, say, in and of itself is borderline too small for a really detailed economic analysis. The reason being is that data is not typically collected and available at that level of geography. The economic models that are available, all of the three that I mentioned, are all county-based models. They're built at the county level, and the economic data is at the county level, the commuter flows, the trade flows, all of that is done at the county level, which creates additional problems for Littleton because of where it's located. So one, it's in Middlesex County, which is a big county with a lot going on. And two, it's on the border of Middlesex County. So a lot of its relationships can kind of flow east and west, and they would leak out of the analysis region. If you're looking at Middlesex County as the analysis region, a lot of that stuff would go westward and to Worcester County. So Implan, for example, does do sub-county modeling, and the model is robust and detailed enough to provide useful information about directionality, about the magnitude of impacts, but using a sub-county model does come with trade-offs in terms of uncertainty and the level of robustness of the model. Not to say that these aren't useful models, but I think everybody needs to go into it with sort of eyes wide open about what these models can do. We can't use tools that don't exist, so I want everybody to be sort of clear about what the tools are and what they're available to do, what they're available and able to do. That being said, economic analyses are built in layers. You start with this direct analysis of finding the jobs, finding the construction, finding the immediate changes, and then rolling that into a software tool and thinking about what geography are we interested in, what level of analysis are we interested in, and then building those things up together in a way that makes the most sense. That requires ongoing conversation. Which brings me to my last point in our final slide, that there's going to be considerable flexibility that's going to be needed in order to do this correctly. The economic impact modeling needs to react to whatever the redevelopment scenarios end up being, and we don't know that in advance. They need to react to your needs, which we can assume some of from the proposal, but ultimately would require ongoing conversations with you. The data and model limitations, which I've touched on briefly here and more in the proposal. And lastly, the external audience. Are we trying to produce economic impacts that speak to the residents of Littleton? Or are we trying to produce economic impacts that speak to a state funder or whomever it might be? The approach that you would take would differ. And just to highlight some of the challenges, the data shows that the vast majority of jobs inside Littleton are not held by Littleton residents. This is something that's also in your master plan. You mentioned it in there, you said 90% of the jobs, or 90% of residents work outside of Littleton, I think is what the statement was. So creating jobs in Littleton is a different statement than creating jobs for Littleton residents. And that is something that we are sensitive to, and we're trying to make sure the model and the analysis is sensitive to. Furthermore, if we're talking about redeveloping the common, the objectives for the master plan and the vision there is to keep people's consumption more local. So you're talking about retail, you're talking about shop fronts, you're talking about food services. Those perhaps are not the first choice of jobs for residents of a town where 2/3 of the population has a BA or higher. So again, you're talking, again, we want to be sensitive to commuter flows, to what the population is, and we want to be able to speak to and about those things. And again, that's going to require some flexibility and ongoing dialogue, which brings us to the end of this, and hopefully what will now be an ongoing dialogue. So questions, comments, we're ready to field those. Thanks.
Before we talk about the questions we have, that's a clarification on the modeling.
Sure.
It seemed like the modeling you were talking about was all, if you build this is the benefits you might be able to get out of it, or how do you about the modeling that would go into what types of businesses should go there in the first place?
Sure. So some of that will come from the market analysis that UTIL does, and some of that will come from the market analysis that we will do. So the tool that we typically use for this is called Business Analyst, and it does things like market gap analysis. It looks at consumers within a certain radius, consumer types within a certain radius, population, retail analysis. It produces a lot of the same kind of data that you would see actually if you go to the leasing page of the Points website. So if you look at what's there in terms of like, the nearest mall is 30 miles away. The number of consumers in the area is this, that, the other thing. So we would use some of that data to figure out what the market gaps are, what's oversaturated, what's not. The economic models, especially, for example, the REMI model, also has built-in trade flows. So it tells you what percentage of at least regional demand is satisfied regionally, and what percentage of that demand is imported, like by industry, and with quite a bit of detail.
The other. We enjoy working together. The other half of this is that we're going to do iterations of development test fits, and those are immediately going to generate data with feedback from this committee about relative fit, and that will immediately set up a program we can test against the market, and that might be square footage of retail, both in aggregate and in bite-sized bits based on the size buildings that are appropriate for the sites that we're looking at. And then what we tend to do is we look at recent regional development activity of buildings of roughly that same scale by doing some research to find out who those developers are and what those product mixes are, to understand what the market is building in that category of building type. And so that's just, we're kind of development hobbyists anyway, so we'll do a test fit. We'll talk to the team about how much square footage of residential or commercial or retail it's generating, and then we'll just look at the market. That's typically how we do it, and bring those case studies right to the committee. through a slideshow or to talk about, we act sort of like pseudo brokers then and talk about kind of the action. Does that make sense?
Mark?
Great, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. Littleton Common Area has multiple challenges. This includes an area bisected by 2 state highways and contains private and commercial property whose owners may have competing interests with each other and the aims of the town residents for the common. What would your approach that brings these parties together to identify the mutual benefits that can arise from revitalization of the common area?
I'll start it off, because I think, and then I'm going to bring my team in, because I think really a lot of that can be achieved through a good public engagement process. I've worked in a number of different communities with the same type of competing interests, not the same, of course, but what I feel has been successful is really trying to, go and meet the various interest groups and have sort of interviews of, well, what are your interests? And collecting that information to then, little by little, bring these groups together in a way that they feel comfortable. So, for example, I'll give you an example of a climate planning project, which is very, very wide, very vast. There's a lot of different issues that are raised, property interests, obviously, flooding that could occur and what happens to property, transportation, municipal governance, a lot of different variations of what happens to us in these scenarios. And what we've done is, again, meeting with folks who are willing to talk about the difficult issues and what their interests are from their perspective, but then bringing those folks together. So we, for example, had a series of interviews with community leaders within the city of Quincy. And then we said, would you be willing to then sort of represent your interest groups and come to a collective meeting of folks to talk about these issues? That then happened. At first difficult and contentious, and people just needed to get to know who each other were and maybe hadn't met before. But we had a series of meetings, I think 3 meetings, and by the 3rd meeting, folks were understanding of their, each other's perspectives. And we came to an agreement because we kept a very specific agenda. We tried to keep the conversation on task. We are looking for your feedback in these areas. Can we get that? Can we achieve that? And so I think the way that we thought about the public engagement process, building upon what you've done, would be that way. And then once we get to this, so really the schematic, the design, the visualization, I think I want to get my team's perspective, because that's where we can actually show them what it is that they're talking about, because then they might actually be talking about the same things and they didn't realize it until they saw it on a map or they saw it in a plan view.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think in this case, you've got MassDOT and state control of key roads, which are critical for thinking about a kind of consistent approach for the project. And then you've got property owners of all stripes, some that are good citizens and some that don't live in the town. And in most of our projects, we have to deal with both types of property owners. And in our Weston project, there's still one holdout property owner. After all of our coalition building, several property owners are on private property doing pieces of the master plan, but there's one owner in particular who we're still working on. So I think Julie's right. You have to, I think it's important before you show anybody anything, you understand everybody's point of view first, because you can be more tactical about how you go about doing this. And you try to build in to the first scenarios, you start to show the stakeholders beyond this group that you've listened to them and you get trust fairly early. But it's good to know, let's say there were 4 or 5 key property owners. I would say understand their point of view before we do anything. That's what I would do. and I would do those as one-on-one meetings, so there's no grandstanding, and, you know, that's my advice. We do a lot of planning for not just municipalities, but for EDCs and for business groups. And so a lot of my experience working on these kinds of plans and doing outreach is really a little bit more business direct or owner direct, which you can especially do as a town before anything's at stake. You can just go and listen to people. You know, so I think that might be very useful. And then MassDOT, we should meet with them like immediately.
Yeah, Tim, I was going to say,
Yeah.
one of the things that I didn't mention, which I know is in the proposal, is we talked about this pre-planning consultation.
Yeah.
So meeting with
With
the regulatory
agencies, yeah.
agencies that are relevant to this work, clearly MassDOT, and maybe even some environmental permitting agencies, to just make sure that they understand what it is that might come out of this and how we might need them to come to the table. So that's what we would propose.
Yeah, and I think another strategy that's important for the for dealing with stakeholders with different interests is finding ways that different aspects of a plan can sort of be a multiple win scenario. And so we're in this Weston project, we're doing that. We're trying to have one of those conversations right now where we say, well, we're going to do a little bit of a trade where we're going to reconfigure this parking area, but we're going to improve this open space, and it's going to work out better for you, even though it's not going to be exactly how it is right now.
Right. This is going to solve the septic problem, by the way.
That
Right.
too.
So we look for what we call triple bank shots.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, I get the next question. Unlike the case for commons in some towns in Massachusetts and elsewhere, Littleton Common lacks any nearby iconic historic sites, scenic waterways, or well-known institutions that can serve as natural attractions to residents and visitors alike. What's been your approach to revitalizing town centers? I know you talked about some of this earlier, but that same question to everybody. What's been your approach to revitalizing town centers that lack such obvious advantages, and what are some of the keys to success and pitfalls to avoid based on your experience?
I think it's what attracts us about Littleton Common is that it has great bones to be a kind of walkable, kind of in terms of the mental map of the town, the place of community, but it's right off 495, and that's also its threat too, right? Cars pump off that to always threatening, you know, what you have to kind of enhance and preserve. And so that's an exciting challenge. I think the biggest challenge is convenience of parking often works at cross purposes with making a place with character that people want to do and park once and then walk around. And so this is the number one political battle it's not a battle, this is the number one conversation point of a lot of plans like this we do, right? Which is, like, okay, so imagine your future where there's so much parking, it's so convenient that you don't want to go there, right? And so that's a design problem, actually. It's a design problem about where the parking is, what the experience is like getting out of your car and then walking, and sorting that out. I mean, Wellesley's done a pretty good job of sorting out fairly recently. Weston, a lot of the nearer in towns that we work with are struggling with that because they're at the kind of city-country divide. That we are attracted more recently to projects like yours, which is the incredible development pressure of being right off the interstate, kind of suburban development pressure, and preserving what's great about Massachusetts. This is a cause of ours. And so how can we finally solve it in places like Littleton Common, like in a more satisfying way? Because the suburban development community care less. I mean, they have a model that they like to replicate. So I think zoning is a key tool, and thinking about transportation and parking. I don't know if that.
Yeah, another thing that's unique about Littleton is having the IBM campus right there is a huge potential pool of people who might come to the town center. It's very walkable. It's a, I don't know, 2-minute walk, but right now it's not a walk that probably anyone wants to do because of the way the parking lots and the streets are designed and because of the opportunities for things to go to. And so, you know, in a place like Weston Town Center, it's a little bit of similar issue where you have, you know, the open space and you have the historic town center character, but there's not quite enough retail or restaurants to really make it a draw. And you also have not really enough people who live in town to support more retail and restaurants. But here, you know, if you can solve some of those connections, then you potentially have a huge pool of willing customers for any new businesses. So it's really an opportunity that a lot of other places don't have. Also, there's a few other topic, but there's I know there's a couple of bike trails in the works, and that's definitely something that is growing around the greater Boston region and Massachusetts throughout as a driver of tourism and, you know, people going for a bike ride and stopping for lunch or ice cream or whatever. And so those are, you know, we'll be looking at all of the other planning work that's going on in town to figure out what are those other opportunities that we can leverage.
Jonathan?
Well, you've actually probably talked about this some, but we want to ask everybody the same questions. What is the best example from your experience with successfully developing a localized redevelopment plan? Was it successful, and why do you feel it is comparable to the challenges with Littleton Common?
Well, we've told you about Weston, but
I would say
another
that.
good example is Essex Street in Salem, which I think you all know it's where the Peabody Essex Museum is. It was pedestrianized in the early 1980s. It was having issues relative to the success of the rest of Salem because all of the new restaurants and development and all of the economic development was happening on streets where there were cars. And Mayor Driscoll it was so confused but no shops wanted to go on Essex Street except for the Halloween weird gift shops. And they couldn't convince any restaurants to go onto Essex Street. And it's because restaurants want to go where people are, and very few people walk down the Essex Street Mall, except during Halloween or to get to or tourists to go to the museum. So we came up with a plan to convert the mall to a shared street that in the winter and during the week would be open to traffic, and then on the weekends you're open to the picture. Halloween time and on high season weekends it would be closed to traffic. It hasn't been fully implemented because her funding strategy is whenever it doesn't snow to use snow removal funds to incrementally do it, but step by step every year it's happening. And so now if you haven't been in a couple of years, it's a clear straight shot view down, and soon the bollards will come and it'll be open. So that's a way to implement things through a kind of stealth public works budget strategy. But we're still the mayor's advisor for that project, 5 years later. That was in our proposal?
Yes.
It's good that you brought it up.
Okay. And again, you guys have been so expansive in your presentation that if you feel you've already covered some of this topic, don't feel the need to repeat yourselves, right? The Littleton Master Plan process included several types of public input, from stakeholder interviews to large public forums to personal interactions at town events to a website. Some were more successful than others. While the MPIC will be happy to help craft the form of the public input process, what alternative outreach methods would you like to use in Littleton to reach those who are very busy or hard to reach?
Well, I'll start out and can speak up if you have some experience. So in addition to what we had mentioned before with having interviews and then bring the folks together, the other thing that is key is making it fun, honestly, making people want to either come to a workshop, if we do need to have something as a joint presentation, and making it accessible and comfortable, frankly. If the committee is willing, we've done real innovative things like have childcare available, some refreshments, different times of the day or night, we sort of need to play around with that a little bit, depending upon the audience. But to have some flexibility in making people want to come because they feel not only that they, the concepts aren't going to be over their head and they can find a way to be engaged. So, and one of the things we propose is a charrette, which is really more of a design-based type of meeting where you've got maps out, and you've got visualizations, and you've got all the utils work, and even some of the modeling can be represented on posters so that people can understand what it is they're doing. And I think that they feel like they're really, they're more so providing their input that's going to go somewhere. So those types of innovations and I'm seeing these guys shake heads.
So, in pretty much every project we work on these days, people are interested in moving beyond the standard community meeting, which is always remains an important part of any public engagement process, but it's about how do you add on to that in order to get a slightly different cross-section of people. And so we've done various other methods on smaller scales, like in Weston we did an online survey, which was very successful. It got 350, I think, responses, all the way to UTIL is working on the citywide plans for both Boston and Cambridge. Boston's completed, Cambridge is still going. And so for those plans, we've done pretty much everything under the sun in terms of public engagement. And and sometimes the most effective thing is to have a booth at the farmers market or some major town event where people can stop in and spend a few minutes learning about the project and giving some feedback in a more fun and engaging way. And that way you can really get a broader representation of people than those who are, important stakeholders and passionate and informed and want to come to all of those evening meetings, but it's important to add on to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we find that models could be effective. So, we were thinking that, set up a tent, have a couple of boards explaining the process, and actually have, like the charrette that you ran through the master plan, have a physical model and let people play with plugging things in. But maybe at a bigger scale, say smaller area, so that the blocks are more satisfying to kind of hold and put in, So
we did a great public engagement campaign for the Boston citywide plan, where we were asking people to think in a much more abstract way about development and what scales and arrangements of development and what types of places throughout the city. And we used Legos and actually had people build, distribute their Legos in the way that they wanted. And it was a really fun activity for people of all ages, and we got some really interesting feedback through it as well.
And for Envision Cambridge, we made a custom game called the Right-of-Way game, because there's the bike activists and the pedestrian activists and the transit activists, and the Cambridge streets are fixed; they're not going to get any wider. And so you could come play, and you could take different bands, but you had to stay within the public right-of-way, and people realized you can't get it all to fit. And so there were great debates when the street teams were out, like having people decide. You had pedestrian advocates fighting with transit advocates about which strip would go down, and that was also quite illuminating. So, I mean, we're into that stuff, and I think that would be, in terms of flow, like find out what the property owners think. Do development test fits next with this committee based on some market understanding and what fits with parking. And between those two things, then with some confidence, then start an engagement campaign where you get into some kind of trial balloons of some possibilities. But you don't want to, you want to do the homework before you get out there too, because you don't want planning fatigue either, and kind of engagement fatigue.
Can I just add one? Oh,
Running through one time, yeah, so we have a couple of questions.
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. We're very enthusiastic.
I believe the question I'm going to give you, I think you've addressed. Keeping in mind the data at the granular level for robust economic modeling for low-income common may be lacking. What analysis tools and what proven economic model methods do you plan to consider to use to evaluate risk-reward of the four scenarios for the common? And I have a special interest in communicating clearly to the public the results of the modeling, not with both the limitations, maybe not separated out, as well as they, shall we say, what they really can tell you, sort of as a recruitment method.
Sure. So we did talk a little bit about
Yes.
the modeling choices. The first thing to understand is that the direct effects, the things that are directly and immediately changing in Littleton, we would know with some great precision, right? We're going to put these kinds of structures up. They're going to have this many square feet.
In terms of tax base.
In terms of tax base, we can fill them with this many jobs. They will be of these occupations. They will have these kinds of average incomes. They will require this skill set. That stuff we can do with great precision because we're sort of filling known structures. And the next step is taking those immediate changes and running them through some kind of software tool. That's where you start, getting these sort of ambiguities. So I think one option is to get a zip code level in-plan model and to run the data through that. That would give you a pretty decent idea of how much of those changes would remain inside Littleton and how much of that economic impact would leak outside of the city or the town. And that would give you an idea of the ripple effects of what that would do. And I think when it comes to communicating that, I have spent the vast majority of my career doing that. By my last estimate, I've done at least 800 hours of webinars and 600 hours of in-person presentations and training, including, on top of that, at least 5 rounds of legislative testimony in this country and others. So,
This was a key issue. We did the Alewife plan for Cambridge.
That explains a lot.
Very recent. No, the recent one, it hasn't been implemented yet.
Yes, I know.
It's funny. And the different scenarios for the soft redevelopment sites in Alewife, we ran through a couple of scenarios with different mixes of residential, retail, and commercial and industrial, and ran complex economic impact models for that. And that was critical for the city manager, because the city manager, Cambridge's success is that its commercial tax base keeps the residential tax base, it's the lowest in the Commonwealth. And so that had a huge impact on messaging that to the city manager, who has some authority in Cambridge, and also, but messaging that to an incredible kind of advocacy community to also make a point to them about getting the mix right in terms of our recommended zoning changes that we recommended. So
yeah, there is some audience sensitivity too. What we communicate to perhaps this group would be different than what we communicate in, say, like a handout for the public versus, so there's a sensitivity to that as well.
Anna.
All right, final question, folks. Revitalization of a town common can take several years and involve a significant investment of human and material resources. Based on your experiences, what are some of the tools and processes that you have provided to your clients so that they can successfully execute the course of action that has been adopted, given limited resources?
You want to start?
Couple lessons learned from this recent project in Weston. One is that, the plan was voted on by the open town meeting, and so we had to convince the entire town to spend money on it. And so really building the case for the plan that you're proposing is crucial. And then in terms of, breaking things down into bite-sized chunks as well and phasing it. So perhaps, the smart sewering is phase 1 and the streetscape improvements are phase 2 and the utilities are phase 3, or whatever the case may be, so that you can spread it out a little bit over a few budget years, but still make sure that your, any construction work is phased in the right way. And then also we do a lot of work, a lot of this is coming up in Alewife and other projects where we are thinking about how to actually pick which things should be phased first to help spur development, and then help use that development to leverage the next round of
public funding for infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so that story about the economic boost resulting from a change zoning and the development vision drives Mass Works and other funding sources for assistance for public improvement. So getting that story in the right order is very important.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
The next step, you'll be...
Interesting and helpful.
You'll be hearing from us in the very near future. It won't be months, but...
Thank you, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want a copy of the presentation, or you don't need it?
Yeah, I think we do, yeah.
Is that
I do need it for the minutes, yes.
Yes.
Do you have it on the thumb drive? Should we do it on the flash drive?
Just either way. Do we have it right now?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, you don't have it on the flash drive? Oh, okay.
I'm thinking this crazy.
I did change it on the transcript now. Save it as a PDF.
Another 5-10 minute break?
Yes.
5 minutes on this.
Yeah.
Still going?
Are you looking for the microphone, Mike? It's right outside the door here.
Yeah, okay.
It's in the common public
Yeah.
area. Oh, this one. Well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, not now.
Kind of surprised me a little bit.
Really, I saw it. Yeah. You're the only one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
On the modeling.
I apologize for the orange shoes today.
Casual Tuesday,
Yes?
Wednesday.
I got a tutorial.
Where do you live?
I live in South Boston.
So you're the guy I yell at about all the stupid bikes that we have in Cambridge. I work in Hawaii. I do work some of the apartment owners out there.
Yeah, okay.
I work at the box and I work at a couple of the other ones for.
No, we have a balanced vision for Railways. It's not all pro bikes.
No, the problem is there's so many bikes there. There's so many spaces you got to put in. Half the people don't even have bikes.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Tons of them. But we try to take some of the
A little bit of a pulse, maybe a little bit of a break right now, would you feel?
I see. Yep.
because we've got so much allocated bikes.
Right, huh? You're gonna take it back, or I'll take it. No.
I think it's one space per apartment, right? Or is it two
Yeah.
spaces?
Yeah, I think it's
One
bike per. What's the requirement for bikes in LA?
One per.
Yeah,
Yeah, one per apartment.
One parking bike space per.
In private development or at the station?
No, private development.
I think it's
I think
one
it's
bike
one-
per
It
apartment.
might be one per unit, yeah.
And you also have to be tied into the system at our wife, so you know when the trains are coming in the apartment complex.
Oh, like the real-time info panels?
Yeah.
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 And they're trying to make sure they're requiring that bike parking is covered and all parking is covered too.
Well, the bikes are usually indoors and they're
Yeah.
hanging upside down in space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh no, it's right side up and you drop them down. They slide out. Yeah.
So we're pulling off the show here. I know that you comes out of here.
You can always email.
You just email it, I guess. I'm so close. Hey, Steve. Nice to see you. He's terrible. Okay. I found it. There it is.
Mike Selden, I'm the chairman of the
Frank Mahady.
Mike Selden. We met before. Yes. Mike Selden.
Emily Ennis, how do you do?
Nice to meet you.
Gothic shop.
Nice to meet you. Could you give your name once again?
Gothic shop.
What is it?
There we go.
I don't mean to put you, if you don't.
I'm not sure we all met, but those
Paul Blavey?
meet you or see you again.
What was it? Yeah, that's my
I recognize you from your picture.
Oh, good. Oh, they used the good one, I hope. Got my best side? No. Got my old side.
Careful, it's actually a question.
All these different groups.
So, in other words, you have to be careful. That's why when you said, I said, oh my God, good result.
Yeah, definitely.
Does it say 420? Okay.
Look who's here. Nice to see you guys.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to see you.
How you doing? Consultant community, I guess.
We charge by the hour for this.
When you went, should we be speaking from the podium?
Yes, I'll give you the layout when we,
Okay, sounds good.
when the break is over.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, goodbye.
Guys, we'll be speaking to the podium, so.
Information for you.
We can join each other, so I think we can spread ourselves out along the front row. Good.
You're very welcome.
Get to me. You get to you. Sorry.
There we go, that's the right presentation. Very good. Okay, sounds good. Great, yeah, sit right here. Okay. I'll stand in the background. Works. I know we're on broadcast this evening.
I just got a high
There's a target.
blood.
So,
Okay.
standing up and
Let me know.
Weird. I don't think so. This is actually quite useful to talk about the schedule. Yeah, that's good. That's great.
Well, at this time, it's going to be. I mean, if I come and peek out to the office, I'd figure it out. So what I'll do is get up, spend an hour or two, get.
Okay, I think we're about ready to resume. Welcome to the Harriman Group. Let me just give you the process. You have an opportunity to give a short presentation. You should introduce yourselves, obviously, and this will be followed by questions from the committee. The floor is yours.
And I'm Steve Cecil, and I'll be the project director. I'm a principal at Harriman, an urban designer, architect, and landscape architect, and devoted my career to putting places together. And I just have the team members sort of introduce themselves to start off with.
So my name is Emily Ennis. I'm an associate and senior urban planner at Harriman, and I'll be the project manager.
My name is Karthik Shah, and I'm an associate as also a senior urban designer at Harriman. And my role will be to sort of work with Steve in working on some of the urban design and planning issues.
So Bill, maybe introduce yourself.
Hi, Bill Scully with Green International Affiliates. One of my roles there is to direct the Complete Streets program.
Frank Mahady, FXM Associates, we're the economic consultants.
And it's a group of people that have worked together a long time together, and so to have an opportunity to put these
the minds and the background together to help really solve some longstanding challenges and take advantage of the opportunities. I think that we really understand the importance for towns to find their heart in a center. When you think about the character, the quality of life, the image of a community, one of the first things that comes up is where is the center? Where's that critical quality? And what's been interesting about working in many communities across New England is that we have a number of town centers that really evolved as crossroads as opposed to the traditional centers that we like to see, and that's what we have to work with. But transforming that crossroads into really a vital center has been clear in your vision, and it expands also to the Beaver Brook area. And we're not going to, even though the focus may very well be on the Littleton Common, we are tracking and understanding that the opportunity geographically has two different parts in two different places. So understanding that opportunity, there are some clear challenges, and matching sewer capacity and development capacity. We've been studying quite a bit about your circumstance, and we've been working in other communities that have the same kinds of challenges, because unless the infrastructure is there, the development can't occur. The infrastructure does come, is the development going to come to match it? I think that in a broader sense, though, if the sewer is there the market, private sector redevelopment investment out there that will come, and it will match up with what the community hopes and expects for change. And change is difficult in many New England communities, and so we see a challenge to make sure that people anticipate and have great confidence about the kinds of positive changes that can occur. And there are direct concerns about traffic, more taxes, more costs. Those are the challenges that we'll be working on. Now, one of the things that we wanted to emphasize throughout our presentation this evening is that you did a master plan, and you've been working on the Common for a long time, a lot of the pieces in place. This and our services are about implementation. This is about doing things and setting up specific actions that will happen. So we've really framed this as implementation services. We're going to be envisioning the choices, coordinating the development potential with the sewer district, getting specific regulations and other catalysts going, working with you to build community confidence that the kinds of changes that you're seeking are good, but making sure that you actually have the tools to manage change, and zoning is a key part of that. We'd like to suggest that this is not a simple challenge, but there are some clear and different dimensions to this. And in our proposal, we frame this as a multidimensional problem. There's the community. The community has to be informed and supportive. The design and planning has to be solid in terms of the look and feel and the feasibility of this. The economics, the cost benefits have to be in place. The zoning and other regulations have to work. And if any one of those dimensions, any one of those four dimensions doesn't work, the entire set of ideas starts to fall apart. So we've aligned our team with each one of those dimensions, and Harriman brings a significant focus on community engagement and community communication. We have great expertise in design and planning, but teaming up with Bill and Green International on the transportation and circulation side is an extremely important part of it. They are the complete streets folks for Littleton. We've worked with them on that basis, and that will be their part of the process. Economics, we bring some unusual economic background in modeling and feasibility studies, but Frank is carrying the weight of the economic analysis as far as that's concerned. And then zoning, and Emily in particular, brings specific expertise in drafting and crafting innovative zoning. Harriman is a 90-person firm. We have several different offices. The planning studio that we're all part of was formerly the Cecil Group several years ago, and we merged with Harriman, and we have a tremendous focus on town and village centers. We're on-call consultants now for 10 years for the downtown initiative for the state. We've worked in 40 or 50, at last count, village centers working with communities across Massachusetts. We take on entire town centers. The images that you have in front of you are places that some will be familiar with you, for you. The image in the lower left is West Concord. We did the 3 different villages of Concord. People think about Concord Center, but not everybody thinks about West Concord, which was a crossroads, actually. Places that have been implemented, like Hingham, through the years, and then entire visions for Windsor Center, for example, in Connecticut. The regulations and the zoning, and there are many really good innovative methods now available for town center zoning, which go all the way to form-based zoning, but I think a key idea is marrying the notion of good design and good regulation can come together and inform everything. The workshops, the community interaction, the surveys, the outreach is a really important and enjoyable part of what we do. We specialize in this as a function of all of our projects. But I think I want to also emphasize that we've done a lot of work doing implementation support, writing RFPs for public projects. That's the old Salem Jail. Reviewing the RFPs, serving as peer review consultants, setting up tax increment finance districts, helping actually do organization planning for the management and the governance in town centers. So all of that's been an important part of what we do. And Frank and FXM are, as I say, going to add the economic dimension.
Hi. Yeah, we have extensive experience in economic development planning, over 25 years in the firm and 40-plus years for our 4 senior professionals. Among the projects we've done are several APA award-winning projects with Harriman, Marlboro Economic Development Strategy, and last year Brockton and Lawrence, and as well as numerous municipal projects, downtown revitalization, village centers. We, FXM, have also done a number of projects for private developers, market financial feasibility studies. You are very concerned about benefit cost analysis. We are nationally recognized expertise in economic and fiscal impact assessments. 2 of our current projects are the $4.5 billion I-84 viaduct reconstruction in Hartford, where we're doing the economic and fiscal impact assessment, as well as the $1.4 billion Mass Pike Alston Interchange project. On a smaller scale, we did a fiscal impact study in Hingham, where Steve and his people have also worked, which was a benefit cost analysis that we presented, I think, at 11 o'clock at night to the Finance Committee. And they understood it, they believed it, they passed forward a recommendation for the zoning change that was accompanying this fiscal impact assessment, and it was done, and the project was implemented. So our role here is to do the real estate market assessment, help assess the economic development opportunities, help frame the overall development strategy, the scenarios, and finally to conduct the benefit cost assessment of alternatives, and I'll get into how we're going to do that subsequently.
And Bill.
Okay, thank you. Again, Bill Scully. We are really happy to be invited to participate with the team on this project. Our role is to provide transportation planning and engineering input or advice, feedback as things take place during the process. We also bring knowledge and familiarity with the community, working on the Complete Streets Plan in 2016 and actually helping them get the first for the town implementation grant that constructed the sidewalk along Russell Street and several other things within the community. As we determined in both our Complete Streets project as well as it's outlined in the master plan, there's a need to improve the connectivity in and around the center, the common. You have nearby neighborhoods, you have the IBM complex, you have things that, as the common is redeveloped and becomes attractive and comfortable, you want to make sure that it stays walkable and a nice change from being on the highway side. We have a strong working relationship with Mass DOT. As you know, 2A and 110 are DOT-owned roads as well as Stevens. But we are able to sit with them. We're able to work both with the community and the state and try to reach consensus on what can be done, in what time frame, and how to do it. So those kinds of things, in a nutshell, are what we are on board for. Thank you.
So, putting the team together, as Emily's pointed out, she's the project manager, and as part of that, she will be largely the day-to-day contact. She has general planning experience in all aspects of this, some unusual background in financial analysis, which is really helpful. But I think one of the things is that in terms of zoning, she was the chairman of her planning board in Milton for a number of years. So she really has been on the other side of the table as far as that goes.
So I'll be working, of course, with the people that you see here today. Steve, as project director, will have direct involvement with the project on the urban design side, and also bringing to bear his experience in the many other communities that we've worked in. My team and I on the planning side, you don't see them here, but Lily Perkins High and Katie Moore will be working on the zoning and on the community engagement. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then as project manager, my role will also to be coordinating my other colleagues at Harriman, including Kartik and his team on the urban design side, and of course Frank and Bill and their team, and bringing together all the pieces in a timely manner to meet your schedule and to meet the goals of the project.
All the way through the first reading, second reading, third reading, and adoption. So we characterize this as a multi-dimensional problem, and so we try to think about with our graphic designer, how do we show a multi-dimensional problem? So we came up with this idea of there are different sides. There's one place that will be created here, and we're trying to put it all together. But the first dimension is really about the community, and the community starts with some aspects of a relationship, but we need to zero in on different components of the community.
Absolutely, Steve. So everything begins, and in the case of zoning, absolutely ends with the community, because of course town meeting has to approve this zoning, and you have an open town meeting, which that makes that even more of a challenge. So as we look at community, it's really a three-part process. It's education, which is a component of outreach, letting people know that the process is happening, letting them know that they're a welcome part of the process, and getting them into the meetings, and that's where the input and the feedback come. And you see an example there of an exercise in one of our meetings. We absolutely tailor the meeting. The first part is usually a presentation, a series of facts or understandings about what the current conditions are and what the implications might be. And then the second part is always a community engagement where we tailor the engagement piece to ask and receive answers on certain types of questions, and what those questions are determined by the conditions in the community itself and the process. And then finally using that to build stewardship. We very much recognize that at consultants, when the project is over, we step back. Doesn't mean that we don't check in. I still hear from a number of clients we've worked in to see what's happening, but it's at that point, it's really the community's responsibility to step forward and implement what has come out of that process, in this case, the zoning. And so what we want to make sure is that people understand and that they've been part of the process, that they know why what's happening is what's happening all the way through. So when we step back, in some cases, I actually had one project where everybody was starting to implement before the report was even written. So, that's exactly the type of thing that we're looking for. So I'm just going to touch quickly on some of the people that are involved with that. Stakeholders are those people who are property owners, residents, business owners, people with a particular understanding or interest in an area. It's very important that we talk to them early in the process and get their feedback in the case of zoning, which will have a direct impact on what they can do with their property. For property owners, it may have a direct impact on the type of business they have. We want them to understand what the implications of the recommendations are and get their feedback on it. There may be something that we haven't thought of, that somebody comes forward in an interview and says, wait a second, I need X. So And looking at that, residents, of course, are an important component at the beginning, again, to educate them, to get them involved, to get their feedback, and then we'll see at the end in terms of the town meeting. And then naturally, the planning board, as I know you know, and the Board of Selectmen have important roles in this process, both on the input and feedback side, but also in moving the zoning from a draft all the way through to the point at which it gets to town meeting for debate. And that's your own process up there for getting articles onto the warrant and approved. It's similar in many ways to others. But when you get to town meeting, that is a 2/3 vote. And so our goal is that when that debate starts at town meeting, that we've done everything in our power working with you to make sure that that debate is an informed one and that the people who are having it have had every opportunity to be engaged before they get there.
So what everybody is going to be trying to unlock here is development, change, and improvements. And we have to look at that from a number of different points of view. And we want to talk a little bit about how that evolves during the process. We really think of this as more than just the sum of its parts. It's not a development happening here, a streetscape improvement happening there.
Yeah, and Emily gave a fantastic overview of the community part, and I wanted to speak about the design and the planning dimension. The complete district has been sort of a concept that we've been developing in our practice for the last 2 or 3 years, and what it sort of signifies is complete districts are actually places where residents as well as the users, the business owners, their needs, their work and living and gathering and recreational requirements are sort of met. And how do you make this happen? The idea is that complete districts are basically a synthesis of market economics. What are the environmental conditions? What are the desirable uses that the community wants, as well as what is the actual town character that is actually desired by the community. And it's not just about putting all this as an input and sort of some sort of an output that sort of comes out of it. It's about understanding relationships. And as Steve mentioned, Emily has a background in financial management. I studied real estate. My background is architecture and urban design. So we sort of all of us have worn this different hats, and we've all been on different sides of the table. So we understand these relationships, and we want to unlock the right and the feasible vision. If you think about this as sort of a lock, whose keys you don't have, then we want to provide you with those keys to create a right and a feasible, implementable vision for this area. And Steve mentioned that this is all about, this plan is about implementation. And we want to shape places, which are pragmatic. So one of the things that we'll be doing is we will be understanding, what are the forces that are sort of shaping this place the way it is, trying to understand those causes, and then we would clearly define. We'll work with the property owners to understand, what their needs are, as Emily mentioned. And then we'll sort of define them, we'll clearly illustrate them, and we'll sort of base all those assumptions within a sort of a reasonable market conditions. And then eventually we will be developing a set of choices that you as a community will have to decide upon. And once we have that process gone through, we'll be testing the zoning. So in this one, this is this is not Andover, I forget. Albany. Sorry, Albany TO district. Yeah, this is the Albany TO district where we actually tested the development capacity on each of those parcels based on the zoning that we were writing, and what that gave us a feedback on, okay, how is the zoning working, how are the setbacks working, and how does that and how are we sort of fine tuning that, and it all the time, we are trying to ensure that the feedback, the community input that we received was incorporated within this. So some of the things, so for the Littleton Common project, we'll actually be working on some of the parcels that will be identified. We'll actually test out the zoning and the development envelope on some of these parcels, and see how the zoning works, and those will be the choices that will be developed.
I think, as we're moving along here, Bill, I think the complete streets side to this, one of the things that I think, working together with Wayland, for example, working successfully with Mass DOT is definitely part of what we'll be thinking about. But they're a different DOT than they used to be, and I think as we take a look at that, we also need to make sure that as development, one of the big concerns can be that as development happens, geez, it's going to get overcrowded. Is the circulation going to work? So looking forward to your input on that. I think that from there, this relationship between sewer districts and development, it just so happens that this is a problem that we've called on to solve many times. We've just finished today was the report for West Newbury, and their attempt to bring sewer and manage a limited amount of development for a center. And we've done a full series of these over time to calibrate, and that's the best word. You need to calibrate this. Not too much, not too little, the right amount. And it does also, it so happens that Carding knows quite a bit about this, and we'd be providing some of the input into that process.
Yeah, and one of the things, one of the aspects we've seen is infrastructure can also be used as a tool to sort of craft your vision. In West Newbury and in Essex, where we work, sort of infrastructure capacity or the sewage capacity actually define the amount of development or redevelopment that could happen, and so. And it sort of all is based on, first we want to start with what are the needs and desires of the property owners, the larger community. We want to alleviate the community's concerns about future economic development. That will be a big part of this, and then everybody would sort of get an opportunity to craft the vision, and then. Eventually, we want to provide a sort of a very clear analysis of cost and benefit and the risk mitigation factors for which we'll be working with Frank in developing, if you go this route, this is the benefits and the cost implications you can have, or if you go this route, this is the envelope that you would see.
And we'll be working with your consultants in the task force and the information. Our job is to have a liaison with that and not redo anything, but inform and be informed by that. We understand that. So, Frank, the economics, the costs and benefits of how all this works is obviously a key part of it.
Yeah, I'm briefly going to go through. I often think of our role as we're the plumbers on the job. We show you how water flows downhill. So we're testing market realities and benefit cost realities. So we're going to do a housing demand analysis, a retail gap analysis, very specific piece of work, which is especially important given the proximity of the point. We'll look at commercial space demand overall, and then we'll, of course, assess benefits and costs of alternative scenarios. We have a housing demand model that has been proven quite good in private practice as well. It's unique in that it accounts for demand by age group based on propensity to own or rent, affordability, and mobility. It isn't just net migration. It's people who are moving every year. We look at how demographics change over time. The graph on the bottom is an example of the target 55 to 74 and under 35-year-old households, which are the very popular target market statements for rental segments from rental housing now. It's been an extremely useful tool in project evaluations and developer recruitment. So you'll have a data that will help the property owners and others and potential developers see how it can be done. The retail gap analysis assesses opportunities based on actual consumer expenditures and store sales within defined areas, usually 5, 10, 15-minute drive times. It can be extremely useful recruiting tool. Private shopping center developers, for example, do the retail gap analysis exactly as we do, and we'll cull out of it potentially supportable stores and square footage. And as I mentioned, it's maybe especially important to distinguish opportunities here from the point. We have a commercial space demand model that looks at other types of uses, including retail, but also office, healthcare, arts, cultural, whatever. And we look at this from an employment-driven perspective. We look at historical trends in employment, both locally and in the region. And we also look at it from a supply standpoint using CoStar, which is the sort of comprehensive real estate database. The graph on the bottom is from the CoStar data. And we'll also show, as I will get to in a second, fiscal impact of potential development scenarios that might prove feasible based on a market demand. So at the end, how do we assess the benefits and costs of alternative scenarios? The graph that's shown here, and I'm sorry you can't really read it, is from a very detailed study we did in North Reading a few years ago, looking at the incremental benefits of sewer from a standpoint of existing uses and comparable properties elsewhere, what sewer would mean to property values, and we have a low and a high range scenario. We looked at it based on potential market growth, because sewer would enable you to do things that you could otherwise not do. And then we again had scenarios from low to high growth at the end to look at what the potentially recoverable tax benefits to the community would be. We're also going to assess, obviously, per capita and per job municipal service costs for commercial development, as well as residential, using proportional valuation and average cost methods, which I could get into if you like. We can also assess the potential indirect and secondary effects using adjustments from a broader input-output model. Very tough to apply at a community level, but it'll give you some indication of what the indirect effects might be. And then we can do sensitivity tests to assess risk by assigning different discount rates to the stream of benefits or costs, so you can see what the alternatives might look like. And at the end of the day, this all sounds very complicated. We failed miserably if we can't convince in layman's terms what this analysis is showing, and that it's rigorous and understandable, which we understand is very important to you. You have to be able to communicate to the community what the risks and potential benefits and costs are of the alternative scenarios we might have for the common area.
Right.
Thank you.
So during this process, we're going to have been collecting a lot of data. We're going to have been collecting a lot of quantitative data, the work that Frank is going to be doing, the work that Bill's going to be doing. We're going to be analyzing that. That's the work that Kartik and Steve will be doing. And we're going to be collecting a lot of qualitative data with the community engagement. The zoning is a process of bringing that all together into actual regulations that will control the physical experience and the economic opportunities in the Littleton Common area and also in Beaver Brook. And so as we look at that, we're going to be looking at your recently completed master plan process. And by the way, congratulations, because that is not an easy thing to do, and it is so critical for having the basis for doing this type of implementation work. We're going to be looking at the stuff from this study process that we bring forward, and we're going to be looking at changes to state and federal law. We note that you're wrestling with recreational marijuana and had to deal with that at the moment as a community. There's also Reed versus Town of Gilbert as an example, with thinking about sign regulations and what you can and cannot control. And there are others out there in both state and federal. We'll be looking at all of these as we go through the process and wrapping this into a set of regulations that will let not just the planning board know what to expect, not just the property owners what to expect, but also the public what to expect. When a project is being reviewed, everybody needs to know what the criteria for judgment are. Crafting zoning is, of course, a general process. Everybody does it. We're going to be looking at how it needs to be done for and with you. So looking at your past, your small town, the fact that you have a historic development pattern, that you have a rural background, you're a right-to-farm community, and farming and agriculture is important, but you've actually lost a lot of that land. And what does that mean for thinking about yourselves in the future? We'll be looking at your current Village Common District, the current Beaverbrook overlay, the aquifer overlay, and thinking about how development can impact the quality of water for good or for ill. And there's actually a lot of things you can do with development controls to positively impact your water quality. We'll be looking at those issues. We'll be looking at the idea of design guidelines, so not just the dimensional standards, not just the use standards, but is there a way that you can and should control the physical environment and the physical experience of moving through these areas. But there are tools beyond just zoning. So there's parking management, some of which falls into the zoning regulations, but some of it is about how parking is looked at. The sewage system, which my colleagues have already mentioned, and what that has. But the real critical piece is nobody wakes up, except possibly me. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I'm going to write some zoning today, right? What you do is you say, zoning is a tool. It is about giving a community new possibilities and creating those possibilities in a way that reflects the community's values. And so we're going to be working with you and the other members of the community to create those tools to reflect the identity that you want, and then thinking about how that identity is communicated.
Well, putting it all together, we tried to emphasize that it takes a complete team and that every person here has a role to play. And my job as project director working with Emily, of course, is to make sure that that stays in balance and this all supports each other and none of the pieces are considered separately, but we're working together. So we're looking forward to your questions that you may have, and I think we've tried to be complete, but if we've missed anything, we'll try to fill you in.
The Littleton Common area has multiple challenges. This includes an area bisected by 2 state highways and contains private and commercial properties whose owners may have competing interests with each other and the aims of the town of Littleton residents for the common. What would your approach be to bring these parties together to identify the mutual benefits that can arise from revitalizing the common area?
That's a really good question. On the traffic side, although making sure that we avoid additional congestion and having good access, there's a plus side to this. There's a fair amount of traffic out here, as you know. And if you're trying to do commercial, mixed use, other kinds of things, having a fair amount of traffic and being close to an interchange, the point is there for a reason, and you're just on the other side in terms of the common. So we see that traffic as a positive thing. But I would say that in terms of getting people to work together, we need to, that's where the stakeholder discussions come in. But I'm going to make an important suggestion here. And you can see it on the map if you look where the property lines are. If you think that each one of these properties would redevelop separately, I don't think you'll get there from here. What's going to happen is that some of the parcels need to be put together. And we've looked at the dimensions a little bit, and the depth is pretty good, actually. It's not too bad. So what's going to happen, and this is what your zoning is going to help you do, is get people to say, aha, there's a larger opportunity for myself financially and economically if I'm an owner. But one of the things we've got to watch for, and actually in West Concord this was a very important part of it, is that you don't necessarily want to lose some of the businesses that are there either. And so you can set up incentives to make sure that people have an opportunity to be part of the tendency in the future, but we think that the economics here are going to show people pretty easily that if they work together, they will be able to dramatically increase their financial situation. So that's our overall thought.
I would quickly add to that, and it goes back to the stakeholder discussions. One technique we've used in other communities, quite often we're doing the interviews one-on-one. Maybe a business owner doesn't want to reveal their plans to their competitors. But we've also used focus groups, and the idea is that maybe you're bringing in 3 or 4 people that do have those opposite interests, and looking for where is the common ground. And sometimes what you do need to do is bring them in the room, give them some maps and some pens, or give them some ideas of how things can look, and start talking about what is in the mutual interest, and then use that to sort of poke at why there's a conflict. And every conflict, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, and every conflict is slightly different. So getting the people in the room and giving them the tools to have that discussion is what we're taking.
Actually getting people together.
Thank you.
Hi. Next question.
Yes.
Unlike the case for commons in some towns in Massachusetts and elsewhere, Littleton Common lacks a nearby iconic historic site, scenic waterways, or well-known institutions that can serve as a natural attraction to residents and visitors alike. What's been your approach to revitalizing town centers that lack such obvious advantages, and what are some of the keys to success and also the pitfalls to avoid based on your experiences?
Yeah, I think that we take a look, we have had a chance to work in some communities that have spectacular waterfronts or a museum sort of thing. But actually, we find that the generators are places where people can go, shop, eat, spend time. The programming of the recreational space, programs are fantastically important. If you have a little volleyball tournament going on in the middle of the common, you'll be amazed at how many people come. I've been working as a member of the advisory board for our own downtown association in Dedham for years, and we have a wonderful historic society. It's a beautiful building. They do talks, but there's nothing like when the Blue Ribbon barbecue came in, the number of people that are coming downtown, it's amazing. So I think that, one final point on that, because we do a lot of historic district planning, you have some really nice historic structures in and near your town center. There's some really nice stuff here to work with, and so being respectful of that core and bringing it out as a feature is a real opportunity that you do have.
I just want to add to that most communities don't have iconic assets, that distinguish them from the rest of the world. And
Well, we live so near Concord and places like that we always think of that.
In Massachusetts, we're spoiled, I understand, and we do a lot of waterfront work too. But really from if you have places or reasons to go to a place, like a nice restaurant or whatever it is, that the uses that are there, they will draw people and they will make an identity. And certainly the amenities that you have at the common area are very different from what you're going to experience at the point. So there's some opportunities.
In fact, there's some drawbacks. Concord Center is a really interesting case because there's just barely enough to keep the Concord residents interested in coming to the center. There are so many buses and people out there taking pictures of the statues and the spaces and that was our focus, was to make sure that there's a way of slightly expanding the number of shops that you can actually go to and enjoy. That little diner, the restaurant there, that's a precious asset.
And one thing I would want to add, like a small point, I think what we're looking for is a sense of a place, and I think you already have that sense of a place because the place is recognized. It's called Littleton Common for a reason, and we want to sort of build up on that strength of on that strength, and add uses that sort of really build up on that, create more pedestrian activity, and allow people, sort of give people a sort of a safe and a good environment to walk to, and come to uses which, as they can say, live, work, and play within the Littleton Common area.
That's a really good question. We all wanted to answer that one.
Yeah.
Hey, Jonathan.
What is the best example from your experience for successfully developing a localized redevelopment plan? Was it successful, and why do you feel it is comparable to the challenges with Littleton Common?
So and I think this is where the difference between planning and implementation, part of what we've had the opportunity to do is to work in communities over a long period of time, starting from, in some cases, the vision plan, and then working from different angles. I'd have to say that Hingham Center and the Hingham Shipyard is kind of an interesting case and point. We did the planning for the shipyard when it was a kind of a rundown industrial area. It's right next to the town center. So that's sort of new. It's a lot of new stuff, although there's some historic little pieces of that too. But the challenge there was to create a kind of a mixed-use environment that people would be drawn to, but was still scaled in a way that it felt like Hingham. But then we worked for the town, and they had an infrastructure issue, which was they talk about an underground change. It was the rail line going in underground, and they had figured out how to get the money to put the rail underground, but they hadn't figured out what to do to put the surface back together, literally, and how to maintain the businesses during the construction period. And there was no money left in the budget for that. So we were hired to figure out how that whole process would work. And then subsequent to that, they said, well, you're doing a great job. Could you do the streetscape too? So I think that that's an example. When I go to Hingham these days, there are places that I remember when there was nothing there. But it takes time. It takes time, and we've had that opportunity. There are others I can think of.
Norwalk, on a larger scale. You've been working there for, so Steve and Margarita Iglesias, one of our colleagues, this is a much larger community, but the lessons apply in that they did the redevelopment plans, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, like that.
And they're now doing the peer reviews on the buildings that are coming in as a result of the redevelopment
And the
plans.
design guidelines.
And the design
then
guidelines,
she's
and then I did
here
another
doing
redevelopment
the
plan in the same
the
area,
zoning
yeah.
that comes in.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of experiences give you a lot of perspective.
Paul?
Okay, the Littleton Master Plan process included several types of public input, from stakeholder interviews to large public forums to personal interactions to town events to a website. Some are more successful than others. While the MPIC will be happy to help craft the form of the public input process, what alternative outreach methods would you like to use in Littleton to reach those who are very busy or hard to reach?
Yeah, why don't you take? Why
I'm
don't
going to
you
stand
take-
up so I can see you. 'Cause I'm gonna get some light.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah, that's a great question, because public outreach methods actually differ by community. There's the standard one, there's the physical ones, the flyers, there's the social media, which surprisingly enough, not everybody has access. So the first question I would have is, what didn't work and why? And from there, we would start to build on it. So we've done a variety of things. One of the pictures you saw up there earlier was a community that Katie and I were working in over the summer. Their big thing is July 4th, and all of the ward councilors, it's a little bit larger community, have parties over the July 4th weekend. So Katie and I went to 3 of them. We took surveys with us. We took flyers for the upcoming meeting. We grabbed a hot dog or 2 because, it was July 4th, and did some outreach there. We find that there's always 1 or 2 people in town that have the email chains or the Facebook or whatever, and when you want everybody to know something, you find those people and you tell them what's going on. We do that. We vary the time of meetings. Not everybody can make an evening meeting. Not everybody can make a Saturday morning meeting. So we try and find out what works best for that community, which town events have the most people coming to it. We've done flyers for an upcoming town meeting where the plan or the project wasn't complete yet, but town meeting was happening, and so we gave out information there. So the short answer is we have a lot of different tools. The key is to find out with you what works best. Online surveys is another one where people can answer on their own time. So we would work with you to figure out what the most appropriate method is.
If you, on the back of the agenda, there's the schedule and the tasks that we proposals. And I'd emphasize the second task there after we start off is what we call a communication plan. And we go back over the history of what worked. And we find out, are you a 7 o'clock town or are you a 7:30 meeting town? And we craft an overall plan, and then we all use that as a guide of what we think we're going to be doing. But then if something doesn't work, we have certainly redone workshops when nobody came, and we found out that was another event was going on. you do what you need to do, but I will just finally say, meetings are really great. If people just are sending emails around about their opinion, we need to actually get people together, because in the end, people are going to get together at this town meeting. People are going to get together to inform you all about what they want to see happen. So we want to get people together. A lot of good things happen there. That's really.
The next question I think you've sort of answered. I'm just going to add a little bit of something that you raised in your comment. Many of you raised. Keeping in mind the data at the granular level for robust economic modeling for Littleton Common may be lacking. What analysis tools and what proven economic modeling methods do you plan to consider to use to evaluate risk-reward of the 4 scenarios for the common? I think you've, as it were, addressed that. The trailer for this is that communicating almost ahead of time, how do you overcome the difference in the competing interests, economic as well as we'll call other, that the town may value, not just the, shall we say, the obvious economic one, I'll call it lifestyle. What techniques do you use? How do you approach to communicate the risk benefits, the cost benefits of those in combination?
Of those unquantifiable? Or
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very good question, and it comes up all the time. And I think that, you know, if you're going to change what's the extant circumstances, you have to not only solve the problem of, you know, you assess the risks and the rewards and the benefits you think are going to outweigh the cost to support the change, whether it's the zoning, the sewer, whatever. But you also have to demonstrate it in a way that convinces people that you're not going to give them something totally out of character with what's there or what they aspire to have. And that's why you do a study like this with an urban design component and a complete streets component and a public outreach component. So at the end of the day, it comes together so that the economic modeling, I mean, for me, that's my favorite part. That's what I do for a living. And we take great care in communicating it, because if you can't communicate, it doesn't exist, is the bottom line. But I think that in the end, when you talk about the social, the cultural sensibility, that's where, you know, Steve and Emily and Kartik and Bill and I will need to come together and say, this is a vision for what can happen here that's not only economically and market sensible and fiscally sensible, but here, folks, this is what it's going to look like, and you may not be afraid of it. Does that answer your question?
No, but it's not. I got the idea.
Oh.
You can't answer the question until you get into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think, but
I'm sorry.
What I'm thinking, though, that I picked up on that is that there are different segments of town. People have different interests, in a sense. And we shouldn't be coming up with results that are the average person will be interested in this. We may want to break it down and say, well, what does it mean for school kids and teenagers? What does it mean for people who have houses that they're downsizing? And think through the process of what the segments of the community are, and then, in a sense, provide feedback and information for that we think those segments will like to understand better, and not just one, here's the whole thing. Maybe that's a way of getting at it. But like you say, we need to actually understand. Right. Thanks.
Yeah.
So revitalization of the town common can take several years and involve significant investment in human and material resources. Based on your experiences, what are some of the tools and processes that you have provided to your clients so that they can successfully execute the course of action that has been adopted, given limited resources?
That's a good one. Well, I think one of the things that will be interesting, and we're with Frank on this, we're going to come up with a vision of 10 or 15 years, how this all will work out. And we're going to find that a tremendous percentage of this is private sector investment. There's a lot of, and for that to occur, people have to make more money than they spend. So part of the tools is making sure that we understand what needs to be unlocked. And you referred to parking earlier. So, for example, in Lee, Massachusetts, there were a number of parcels that all of them were too small to redevelop, but if they would pool the parking and use it and put a common parking lot and share it. There were several communities. I'm thinking Middletown was another one. And what we actually did was to think about shared parking solutions that the town sponsored the agreement but didn't have to pay for, right? I mean, it's very simple. But those kinds of things work. Certainly, you have all kinds of tax increment financing mechanisms to take advantage of the private sector, and then thinking about the kind of tools that the public-private support and grantsmanship that is coming along with the state, particularly the state these days, to bring things. We were talking about MassWorks earlier, and how important the MassWorks is in joining you. You've got development coming. If you've got the infrastructure, how does that come? And that's something that, well, we've worked together on quite a bit of that.
Yeah, I think the other thing, in thinking about that, one of the things that we do is, first of all, is who should be doing what, when it should be done, how it should be done, how much is it going to cost. And you'll have gotten a lot of that from your master plan already. So what we then do is drill down to the specifics for this piece. A lot of it is financing, as Steve said. It may be public-private. It may be something like a technical assistance grant from Mass Development or from DHCD on their downtown initiative. I've done a number of ULI taps that, there's other technical assistance programs out there. But really, to keep people engaged, if you step back, if something takes a long period of time, you inevitably have somebody think, didn't we already spend that? I thought we did that. Why is nothing happening? And so how do you keep those people engaged? Part of it is that education and stewardship process. Part of it is finding what a lot of people call the low-hanging fruit, right? What are some small, simple things that can happen in an area to indicate that change is coming? So it has been everything in our experience from putting up some signage, some banners or something, scheduling events. We were talking about some strategies for one community where they didn't have anybody after working hours. So it was, can we have a movie night here on Thursdays? Can we have a food truck event here once a month or something like that? Something that is a physical representation that an area is changing while the longer term pieces are
They're not all
place.
actually big ticket items, lots of little things.
They don't have to be big ticket.
Okay.
And we also recognize that you have institutional resources, and we're not going to come up with something that would require you hiring 15 people.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This is good.
Just, again, as project manager, just say we look forward to hearing from you, and we would be very much interested in working. We are very much interested in working with you.
Yeah.
We see the challenges as ones that, although we've seen some of the challenges in some other communities, every community is unique in what it faces. And we would love to work with you to address these and come up with a solution that is unique to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You'll be hearing us from.
Presentation was very helpful.
Great,
very-
thanks. Thank you. Of course, if you have any questions, needless to say,
Will.
you know where to get hold of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So at the end of the day, walk yourself out of the way.
No.
Good.
No, in fact, that way, my own mind was kind of comparing just,
I'm sorry?
For the
if
meeting
you
on
turned
the
all the words into blah, 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 between the three groups we interviewed, visually, they all look different.
Oh, really? We should take a break. Yeah, take a brief break.
You think it is?
Good.
Sit on the other side of the table, seeing interviews and finding out how different they often are.
Yeah.
Yeah. The championship yard was about. That's a lot to sit It was a destroyer construction site that he called the shipyard. So it was a destroyer construction site during the Civil War. It was only active about 2 years. And then it was redeveloped, it's for the MBTA ferry up down to Boston. So, yes, the key there was we had to negotiate a deal to get the parking off the water, not on one side. And then set up a whole site plan, took about 3 years to get through. The drill comprehensive plan, and then there's something.
Thanks for coming. I really
Thank you again. Appreciate a chance to meet you.
Plan on that, and that led to relationships that.
Can do three.
The two gods, is that what?
Yeah, do the plan. You'll have to explain to him.
We had
By
to have
the
a
way,
conversation.
you know, the question is, it gets really interesting.
Could be, yeah.
I've been doing this as long as I tend to be.
Yeah, I don't know that where,
But you can't model everything.
there was, there was stuff there when you look at it, and, it was a really tempting site, but it was one of those classic cases where there's enough junkies
Yeah,
that.
that's
In fact, the original building 19 was building 19 of that old thing. Oh, really? Yeah, and it was this old warehouse site up White House. And it was cool in a way. And then you start thinking about housing. You know,
Good presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You saw this. Yeah.
There's an area in which it may or may not.
I'd like to stay here, I'd like to get a class. Yeah. So they kind of said it was something to themselves. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, and that's a, you know, there's been a lot of studies done to try to quantify amenities where it's very good. And as you see,
All of you. So that's the key. No, I've been on the other side.
specific context that most applies. That's a great question. When I get that question, I know I can't answer it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Professor Glady, you're going to enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
I can see what's happening. You're the same thing happening. You're like, oh, Jesus.
Y'all want it to be nicer, y'all want it to be like.
You want me to preview what I'll say to the group?
You can preview the whole truck stop.
Okay. I wish we could pluck one person from one group and plug it into a different group. That would.
Yeah.
One group just didn't do anything for me. One group had one standout person.
Yep.
And other component parts that were not impressive. And the third group was good all the way along, but would probably benefit from, boy, if you could take
that one guy.
Yep, I think we're probably on the same page.
Yeah, and what has me worried is that that's what would work for us, that hybrid that you described.
Yeah.
And the risk involved in not doing it is not inconsiderable. That's what
Yeah,
concerns
well,
me.
maybe we pick the other alternative and just steal all the good ideas that the other guy had. You know?
Well, it's the execution
Yeah.
that has me concerned, especially not so much for us, but for the town. The town interface kind of.
Paul, I have something to ask you.
Yes, John.
Are you familiar with the fact that every year now, for the last 4 years or so, we've been having these hidden treasures events in May?
Hybridization.
I only hear about them like after the fact. I don't know much about it, but.
Okay, well,
yeah.
all right, so we sort of, I've been only involved in the last one last year and then this year. Last year, we sort of go to a conservation and historical sort of things together, trust and commission and society and commission. And last year we went, it was the Prouty Woods, and we had, all kinds of, conservation walks and things like that. And then me as a historian, I got involved in the historical side of things. We put on a little exhibit on the Prouties and the land. This year, we're going to the Cobb Yap conservation properties. And looking into that, I realized the enormous importance of the Cobb family. But I also I gather that your family had some connection with them or something.
Very
Somebody
much so.
told me that,
Yeah,
there
my
was...
dad was the first president of the Cobb Corporation that wasn't a Cobb. And, and he and Bobby Cobb Jr. were contemporaries.
Oh.
And Bob Cobb Sr. was my dad's mentor.
Oh.
And my brother Mark still works for the Cobb Company.
I think I
Most
heard-
people think doesn't even exist anymore, and yet
But it's in
the
Arkansas.
It's in Arkansas. It's the biggest
Right.
seller of chickens in the world.
So, I've
So
been
anyway.
reading about
Yeah.
that, and my mind was
Yeah,
blown,
yeah.
because
Oh, I know all things Cobb.
So,
So who are we missing?
would it be useful for me to talk to you sometime, or to talk to your father sometime, or start by
but
talking?
he's got the issues of a 91-year-old
Oh,
man's mind. So, but we'll sit him down, and he'll remember some things and not others.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
maybe we could make some kind
follow
of,
up with
because I,
me.
you know,
Excuse me, gentlemen, we
No,
have.
okay, as soon as we get back.
We're limited
Jonathan,
by.
I'd
we're limited by.
love to follow up.
Okay, but we're limited by broadcast.
Sure, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness, oh, jeez. Well, this is nothing wrong with talking about this. This is.
All right, the next step for us, thank you very much for staying with it, handling the questions, and adding when necessary. It really worked out very well, I thought. Is everyone satisfied so far with the process? Okay. So now the question comes, and for the next step is evaluation, checking, obtaining reference information on the candidates. So my question here is, from a strictly execution point of view, my position as chairman simply is we should be doing at least two. I'm going to just say that unless the candidates you feel are, two of the candidates just aren't worth having that kind of expenditure of time. I mean, you're entitled to your point of view. But if we say that we're going to do two or three, that's an important decision for the next step in the process. So, did anything happen tonight to any of you at this point that would suggest that we should do more than two?
Not for me.
I think all of them had pluses, pros with each of the firms. So, but to me, there's a firm I think is a better one. I have a number one firm,
Sure.
so I would start there, and the other two I think have. To me, they balance. They kind of have
Okay.
different yin and yangs of
Yeah.
them.
Well, I don't want to get into the ranking quite yet,
Understand.
because we're still collecting, and give you a chance to
I don't
think
have a
about
clear
some.
drop off after two per se.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to limit personally to two, and I think
Understand.
that Mike Fontanella and who volunteered, I think, to assist with this probably would also prefer two. So I think what I'd certainly like to do here is just basically, without commenting on the whys and the wherefores in comparison, which two are, in your view, worth having the committee have its energy and time spent on the next step? Mark, I'll put you on the spot first.
Me first, I'd say the second and the third firm, I'm comfortable with
Okay.
proceeding forward with.
Okay.
I think they were all good, but
No comments, you don't have to explain anything at all, it's just, Mr.
But at some
Leibowitz.
point, can't we expand? I'd love to hear his reasons, just
Sure,
as anyone
sure, no,
else's.
I'm looking for divergence here.
I have this is one of my tendencies wherever I do things, I always can find the good things of everybody, and I could see good points in all three of them. I find it hard to distinguish, between them. I think they all had some very strong points.
So you would like Anna and Mike and I to spend time on all three?
I find it hard at this point to.
No, it's okay.
To make a.
That's fine, okay.
To
Anna?
make a distinction.
Well, to some degree, I agree with Jonathan. But I think ultimately, the second and third.
Okay.
I think Harriman, the third firm, was, if I had to do one, I would do them.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were successful in references, I wouldn't see a need to ask anybody else.
Okay.
So besides that, I think if I went from that, then I would probably ask both for one and two. That's how I'm kind of looking at it.
So you'd ask for the other two as well?
I would ask the other two if I didn't get good answers out of the references for Harem.
Okay.
I'm actually pretty good with that approach. I thought as an overall presentation, overall group, Harriman stood out. But boy, I liked one team member from the Fort Point group, that Tim Love from UTL was good at the other parts for my mind was so weak that I would, starting from the top, that I would be worried about handing them that group the project, and the other one just didn't resonate with me at all.
Okay. I want to suggest from a practical matter, a fail-safe mechanism and see how this would go, and that is that there seems to be consensus clustering, even in aggregate, around candidate 3, the Harriman group. That seemed to be the one. And my suggestion is if something is detected in response to the scripted questions that raises a red flag, that would set in motion immediately. I'm trying to get a sense.
Scripted question, you mean asking of the references?
Yeah, in other words, if the responses come back and indicate an issue about whatever, I mean, the scripted questions now can be prepared in a way now that makes a lot of sense because it'll reflect our experiences and our understanding of what's going on. If we discover during the course of, if something is triggered about the third, we can immediately move to the second. That's one approach. Okay, that gives a sort of a preference to candidate 3. I want to make sure you're comfortable with the idea that doesn't mean we left out 2. Go ahead. Okay, if in the course of checking reference to candidate 3, it doesn't matter which, I'm just using them as the guinea pig, that during the course of screening those references, we get a red flag that something they have not met some requirement in the past, and it turns out consistent among the references, however obtained. That would automatically trigger beginning the collection of the second group. Or we just do 3 and 2 and use those as our...
I'm okay with, I mean, everybody seemed to have some positive sentiment toward the Harriman group, the third group. And if you do the background check on them and it all works out well, I don't know at what point we're going to decide, but I mean, I'm prepared to do it tonight. What I wouldn't like to see happen is if you find out something bad in that process that we just by default go to one of the other 2. I think it would require a reconsideration,
Okay.
further discussion.
You would like to have, that's what I was trying to get at, whether or not you folks want to come, revisit.
For my purposes, if everybody, I don't know, I'd like to hear more detail what people have to say, but I'd be comfortable with them if their references check out.
Okay, so I
agree.
We can now open up and discuss from a professional and point of view.
So you want to discuss the
Yeah,
merits
but
of each group?
yeah, it's not to demean any of the others, but to explain why 3 might, or 2 might work, or 1 might work for you, so that you're off the hook for a change. Paul?
Okay, I'll start with the first group, Stantec. I got the sense that this was a small team put together to go handle a small pond project from a very big company, and I didn't get the sense that they really had as much of a sense of Littleton, and they didn't have enough comparables on similar-sized communities. There wasn't a whole lot there that struck me as innovative or helping us get past points that we couldn't just do on our own. Second group, Fort Point, when they start out with factual errors right in their proposal that the Littleton Minutemen left from Littleton Common, which we're going to go back and rewrite the history book. How do you, and then they're introducing themselves to each other tonight as they're in here, not even knowing how to pronounce each other's names. I mean, I didn't get a great sense of leadership from the top, but I was very impressed with the fellow Tim Love from UTL, who had worked in Weston and other places. And from their patchwork presentation, most of these groups, or at least the first 2, to my mind, the visual presentation. I mean, how can you sit here and tell us that communication's an important part of the process, and then have stuff you can't read on the screen as part of your presentation? His schematics were very good, easy to grasp. I thought that was good. Much like, I guess, transition to the third group. The only guy, or the only team that hit the economic thing in a sense that seemed to grasp that you need to convey information to people in the way they understand it, I think was the third group. And then overall, I thought Cecil he just seemed to, I hope he's more involved than not to diminish Ms. Ennis's capabilities, but he just seems to have a big world grasp of things and a lot of wisdom there. I thought that team was strong in all suits, but boy, do I wish that guy from UTL was in their team, but he's not.
Okay, I'll start with the firm I thought was the best firm.
Please.
So I thought Harriman didn't really have any weaknesses. Other ones I thought had a weakness of some kind. I think they were strong in economics, strong in transportation, strong in urban planning. They were okay in urban design, okay in zoning, okay in general engineering. I thought they were the most organized presentation. The only firm that addressed Beaver Brook. Everybody else forgot about Beaver Brook entirely. They had the most homework. They knew about the locality. They knew about our zoning. They knew about our regulations. They knew about some of our history. They done more with the homework, in my opinion. I thought they addressed the key points, and I'm not just going off the interviews. I thought their proposal was the best proposal. When it came to UTIL, I liked their UTIL group with Fort Hill. It was more disjointed. I agree with Paul. I didn't like their proposal as much because it was very wordy and didn't present well and had a lot of factual errors. Well, not a lot, but enough that were noticeable to when you're reading a proposal. These things jump out at you. To me, I think they were the least organized in terms of their presentation, in terms of their information presentation, and I took that the UTIL group, left side of the brain, right side of the brain. Left side of the brain was great. The creativity and your like ideas and things like that. The right side of the brain, I think, was lacking in terms of structure and organization and presentation of information and that kind of thing. I'm a right side of brain guy, so I value that too. But you need both in a document like this. And then Stantec, I thought they presented themselves well. I thought there is benefit of having a cohesive group all within the same firm. You don't have any issues with culture or communication or tools or disjointness because you're all working in the same organization, and it's true. It's a benefit. You can tap into the larger Stantec, which is humongous, if they needed to. And they said they were a small group within a larger firm, which I understand how these groups work. They do work like a small group with the resources of a big firm. But I do think this is a small project for such a big firm, and how important are we to them is something that's always going to be an issue when you're working with a large firm, in my opinion. But they did have some pluses. They only want to address sustainability, about they had some interesting ideas about how to do the redevelopment there, but they didn't do as much homework. They don't know the locality as much. So, to me, Stantec and Fort Point, they both had pluses and minuses. Versus Cecil, where I didn't see any standard weaknesses.
Hello.
So I think talking about it from more the positive aspect of Stantec, what I really appreciated about what they said was at the very end about having a roadmap. Because I think from an economic perspective, trying to actually implement it and figuring that out on our own will be challenging enough. But if we can get the consultants to help with that, I think it's a huge bridge to where we need to go next. So it's unfortunate that they didn't have other pieces that could really put them ahead of Harriman. UTIL guy, I totally agree. It'd be great to be able to have him along for the ride. conversely, on the Harriman side, I think that they had a little bit of lack of roadmap there at the very end, maybe just not enough explanation around how they were going to be helping us to that point. So that's probably one concern that I did have about their presentation and their Q&A, was that didn't come up either on their own or through the Q&A. Let me see if there's anything else in my notes. So, no, I think those are my primary comments.
Jonathan?
Well, as I said, I could see strong things in each of them. What I particularly liked about the Stantec people was I thought that they had somewhat more innovative notions about how you do things, and I particularly liked the point that they made about how when we said, well, we don't have anything here, they said, well, you develop something here, you develop a program, and I like that, though, of course, the Harriman people did too. I mean, I remember, going through the written presentations, Harriman stood out to me as definitely the superior one, and I thought they had very good ideas. I think there are things that we, as other people have said, each one of them had certain strengths in some areas. I would be happy with any of them if other people feel that Harriman is the best. I'd be delighted to go along with that. I think that the Fort Point people, I mean, there are three different groups, clearly, not like the others, but each of those groups has some real strengths, and one of the big strengths with them, but that's also true with Harriman, is they do have a lot of experience in Massachusetts and a lot of connections in Massachusetts, and that certainly would be very positive for us in hiring either of those.
Mark?
I think Harriman came off more as polished. They've done this gig a bunch of times. It was almost like a theater presentation. This one stopped, this one picked up. They rehearsed. They did a really good job presenting, and I think that's what we saw more of. From a gonna give us more bang for our buck, Fort Point, the guy over here and the UMass guy, if you put the two of them together, I think we'd hit a home run with them. I agree maybe the rest of the team isn't as strong, but those two people I thought could carry this whole job. Stantec was nice. They did a good job. They didn't know about Littleton as much as I would have liked, although the Fort Point people knew about our overlay districts. They did their homework. They may not have been as polished as Harriman. Harriman's obviously a bigger firm, probably has more money, better budgets and things. I think we're a small little town. I think we get more bang for our buck with Fort Point, but I would be happy with either Harriman or Fort Point. Only because I think they both did their homework and they both knew Littleton pretty good. And plus, we have Green, who knows the town of Littleton too, for Harriman, so we're already using Green.
Yeah. As a result of this, I was thinking 2 steps down about being in a room with any one of them and discussing the cost and what we're going to get from it. And it definitely shifted my view about how to approach this, which we can discuss before we go into battle in the future. But the 2 concerns I have, the first one is which operation would appeal and work best with our town, and especially the diverse parts of it. Who could be understood? And for me, because of the TLI, and to some extent, because of the particular personality of the Donahue guy, I agree with Mark in summary. I think the interaction between those guys and the town would be largely positive on just about any level. More so, in my view, than the more, shall we say, comfortable, and they were very comfortable with, and I would have no problem at all leaving the Harriman folks alone with the folks from Littleton. They fit. That's an issue for me, on the other hand, because I don't necessarily want to have everything that fits. I don't want to keep doing the same grind. we don't have to solve the entire problem. This is what I came with. When I was listening to it, I realized that the project we're taking under, the revitalization of the common, has lots of parts. Parts we don't even know exist yet because, for example, we don't know, I don't make a big deal of it, the impact of people thinking, you know, we're going to have a sewer here. I mean, that's a big deal maybe a bigger deal than we realize for a lot of people. So the all-encompassing consultant to do the all-encompassing contract may not exist at this point. Pardon the pun. So what I'm suggesting here is that I consider Harriman and the, I'll call the .4 group, okay, to be worth exploring. I'm now willing to spend the time on the phone and dig into this pretty hard to see what we come out with. Because I'm not sure that any one of these firms by themselves can do the whole RFP the way we may have to do it. And just as we did in the master plan where certain things in the RFP never really got done properly, I think it did not do well from it. As a result of that, there were other things that were done extremely well and other things that, and you can hear from the comments, that were not done. Not so much well, just weren't done. So as far as I'm concerned, I think for me it's a tie in brief between 2 and 3, and I'd like to get more information, come back, and we do this briefly once more.
This meaning a discussion like we just had now?
Yeah, now we'll have some more. We'll have people who've actually worked with the firms and can tell us something, you know, it could very well be that there's stuff here that we still don't know. So I'm suggesting that we do the reference check and more, as it were, background checking on 2 and 3, which I think would be a normal thing anyway for recruiting. Comments, if there's any?
Wait, can you repeat your comment about what it is that we're gonna get out of this? I mean, I got kind of lost here. We're developing a plan for the common and a zoning plan and basically an implementation for how this would work. Right, that's what we're getting out of this product. Are you thinking something different? Or are you
Well, there's actually, okay, it's a point of view, not anything different. There's an ongoing process, or ongoing activity program, which is called, we're looking at, and now the sewering project is further along than a theory, okay? It's now has more in reality. And certain aspects of it, especially the financial part, is now better understood than I think ever before. So it now becomes more of a reality. Its feasibility is within our grasp. Okay. This will have an effect on the common and on the prospect of having that. Okay. Great, here's the sewer. Now what happens? Okay, we can't go, I'm trying to avoid that. Now what happens? Okay, that's not the way it works. So what I'm saying is that some of the work that we have on zoning will depend largely on what the sewering looks like. A lot of what the sewering looks like may depend on how the interaction goes between the town talking to property owners, not all of whom are residents. How we take those points of view and express them with the residents of the town. How do we find the common ground? If we even accomplish that under this contract, we'll be ahead of the game. So all I'm saying is, we may not be able to accomplish all the objectives in the RFP here. Okay. That's the long and the short of it.
Well, in fair to the respondents, that's what they were asked to respond
Sure.
to, and I
Yeah.
don't think we should be changing the...
No, I'm not going to change RFP, I'm just saying the expectation.
Based on the comments I've heard, I'll throw in a couple other points. I don't see Harriman and Fort Point as comparables, or close in my mind. I think Harriman may be polished and maybe even seem a little stodgy in some respect. But they don't have the big glaring weaknesses I have. As much as the guy from UMass on the economics was very blunt about statistics not being, he seemed to miss a big point. It's like, well, we're not looking for how does change at Littleton Common affect the economy of the United States or the New England region. We're looking for how does the sewer impact the value of a property. The third group guy got it. He says, again, we've done this before in Reading or wherever it was before. I don't know why it was so hard to grasp, what it was we're looking for in terms of economic analysis. Is certain changes applied to properties generate what in terms of local revenue? That's a state agenda as far as how many jobs do they create. We all want jobs, but it's not the, it's not the town of Littleton's problem to solve. Unemployment is not a local issue, and yet that seems to be where their economic analysis is going to come from. It's like, what does that serve?
I have a suspicion that something was lost in translation, because I heard it very differently. I mean, I heard the same words, but the context to me was very, I think he was telling us, these are the kind of data that are readily available. We don't have that, because we don't have that. I mean, it's not, I just saw it different.
Well, I mean, he did say, he specifically said because of our size, certain sort of things are not going to be available. It's like, well, the third group perfectly understood that what we're talking about is how do proposed changes affect, local revenue generation, et cetera, the stuff that would matter to us. Why would you even assume we cared less about its impact on the bigger economy? It's not our charge.
Well, the assumption sometimes is that what you want to do, just as you do for the big economy, you want to do that for the small economy to see what effects it would have. But I agree with you, Paul.
We never
certainly.
stated that anywhere.
Well, I think that was what the implication was, but I agree with you that for most of us, and as somebody, I'm lost because I can't remember who said it, as somebody said, probably, you're not going to provide a lot of jobs because, so many percentage of the people in Littleton have a BA and they're not going to be looking for jobs in retail, so, that's not particularly.
I just heard his comment very differently than you did, which is about to happen when you.
But the other thing is there's 6 of us. You have everybody out in the town. This has to be sold to the residents of the town of Littleton. I just think the second group, specifically those 2 guys, are going to be better at explaining everything and drawing people in to this process than Harriman is, I agree with you 100%. Harriman was on point on pretty much everything they did. They were, and maybe that's why it's raising a flag to me. They were practiced. This was
I also
they put on
took
a
it
show.
as that they had done, I don't know, 100, but a lot of these.
But towns like us, at least more comparable.
Had done towns like this, and so they've done this, and so I think they do have somewhat of a script because they know what they want to talk about, and they know what the points they're going to make, and they know what the things that are relevant to a topic like this.
But I'm just saying that as a town, those other 2 gentlemen were easier to listen to understand what they were saying, and make their point. I just thought they were easier. They're going to be easier to sell.
They were far more dynamic and far more on
engaged,
point.
exactly.
Engaged. I think. Yes. I agree with Mark. I think from a public interaction point of view, I think that they would be far more effective. And
I think Harriman, either one, I think is going to be fine. That's.
Yeah, let me also say, I mean, as Anna and Mike know, when we came just having read the stuff, I was very strong on Harriman. I'm still strong on Harriman, but I think my opinion of Fort Point went up after their presentation tonight. I mean, they struck me as having done a very good presentation, and I was.
Kindly check the references of 3 and 2, give you an opportunity to continue to digest. We'll come back with the information, do the readouts, have further discussions, arguments, and do it.
That's fine. I don't try to get too wrapped up with the personal engagement and the interviews is important, but I don't throw away what was in the proposal.
Right.
And so proposal is a reflection of they have time to think through it, they have time to present the information, and they have time to check their stuff. And there was a little sloppy, in my opinion, some of the stuff that was in Fort Point. It was more painful to read for me to get through Fort Point personally. And so I agree with you. The energy that particularly Mr. Love had on Fort Point was good and engaging, and I think that was a positive thing. They significantly improved their standing from the interview going in than what I had coming in as well. But I didn't see anything enough to take away from what I thought Harriman had coming in. And so to me, I look at both elements. I think we have a good team there. And I would lean towards, if you want to get references on 2, that's fine. I have no problem getting references for 2. But I'm usually from references. It's usually, did something come in bad?
Yeah.
It's going to take you away from something, right? So barring anything coming in that says, oh, my goodness, that was a bad thing.
It's going to take a lot to knock them out of the box.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so.
One of the things that I'd like to mention about the references is that, having read through the proposals, they gave certain folks to give references, whereas I know I've identified 4 references for each of them that have projects very similar to Littleton. So if we could actually highlight those to them and ask for specific folks at those projects because they are similar to ours. And if there's any reluctance, then that in and of itself is a red flag. But being able to identify the work that's very similar to what we're about to embark on, I think is important.
And how they worked with them.
Well,
Yes,
exactly.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you would,
The whole thing.
yeah. So we'll do 2 and 3.
And related to that, it's interesting that Harriman did not use Hingham as a reference, even though they worked with them for 20 years.
Correct.
And so I would be curious to have, I think they did mention that was a very relevant example. That's one of the reasons I asked that question. What we wanted that question was, what's a good example?
Right.
So while it's not identified as one of the references, I think it's worth asking just to see, so if you could get a reference from
It's
from
conceivable
Hingham.
that all the folks who were there for the Harriman part of the gig are
Could be,
gone.
could be, that could be. So,
So do you want me to say which ones I would recommend, just so it's out there? So with Harriman, I would highly recommend we get Tiverton, Rhode Island, Columbia Square in Weymouth, which they did offer, the South Hingham work, and then at least one of the 3 on pages REL 2627. So there's 3 of them listed there, so at least one of
What
those.
about Weston? They did Concord, right? Why don't we-
Weston was a different thing.
No,
Concord.
Oh, West Concord.
Yeah.
Then for Fort Point, I think it's important that we get the Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which they did not offer. Then City of Cambridge, Weston, and Salem, Essex, and those last 3 they did actually offer. Yeah. So just, again, because
Harriman, I'd say Norwalk. You mentioned Norwalk.
Connecticut, yeah,
Connecticut, that's on that page.
that's a viaduct,
Okay.
it's a viaduct
Yeah.
product.
all right, for Harriman.
I would agree with Mark, too, that if, whether it's been mentioned or not, West Concord is, we can all visualize it, and I think their management team's been in place for a long time, so it's likely the same people in charge that were in charge when they did their work there.
Okay, we can do that.
Well, I think we all wanted the magic one to just
No such thing.
outshine. But I think we're comfortable enough with 3 and 2 to go with them.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I think process-wise, I think we had some good questions, and I think this was a good,
Good night's work.
good effort.
Yeah.
Appreciate
I think
it.
that-
I want to compliment the team here. You guys did a great job, really appreciate it.
So the plan is for that meeting on the 20-something of March?
Yeah. Hopefully we'll
To
have
be
all
our-
the reference checks done by then.
Okay.
And we'll make a decision at that point. Well, we won't make a decision yet.
22nd?
No,
We'll make a recommendation, which then has to be negotiated, I guess.
There's already, that's the night when we have a joint meeting of the Selectmen, Finance Committee, and School Committee to finalize the budget on that night. At the school committee meeting, which is also a Thursday night.
School committee meeting got moved to the 20th,
When?
to the Tuesday, as of this morning.
Oh, okay. As of last night, it wasn't.
Aren't you
It's on
glad
the
you came
20th.
tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, is there any further business? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion we adjourn.
So moved.
Hear a motion to adjourn? No further discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourn, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great.